I'm not feeling well. Might be coming down with something. Thompson looked up properly, seeing his captain for the first time in several minutes. What he saw alarmed him. Hoffman's gray pallor. The beads of sweat the way the older man was subtly massaging his left arm. "Sir, are you having chest pain?" Thompson asked directly, his concern evident. Hoffman hesitated, then gave a reluctant nod. "It's probably just indigestion, but yeah, been getting worse for the last hour or so." Thompson didn't waste time. He immediately reached for the radio. "This is SkyWest 529 requesting immediate medical assistance for the captain. Possible cardiac event." The response was immediate. Within minutes, the jet bridge was reconnected and paramedics were boarding the aircraft. In the main cabin, passengers watched with growing concern as medical personnel rushed toward the cockpit. Alicia addressed the cabin, her voice professional despite her concern. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a medical situation that needs attention. Please remain seated and give the medical team space to work." Near the front of the aircraft, Garrett Wilson checked his watch again, calculating the impact on his schedule. The Nakamura meeting was at 3 p.m. Pacific time. It was now 8:17 a.m. Central. Even with a 2-hour delay, he should still make it, assuming the flight eventually departed. But each passing minute increased his anxiety. His phone vibrated with a message from his assistant in San Francisco Nakamura team requesting confirmation of arrival time. Meeting still on schedule. Wilson typed a terse reply. "Delayed in Chicago. Technical issue plus apparent medical emergency. Will update ETA when available. Ensure they don't reschedule with Burke team." The reference to Burke International Pinnacle's primary competitor in the Nakamura negotiations revealed Wilson's underlying concern. If he couldn't get to San Francisco in time, James Burke and his team would be waiting to swoop in with a competing offer. The merger wasn't just a business transaction. It was a high-stakes competition with millions in potential bonuses and professional prestige hanging in the balance. In row 12, Maxwell closed his book completely, his attention now fully on the developing situation. As a pilot, he understood what a medical emergency involving the captain could mean for their flight. If Captain Hoffman was unable to continue, they would need a replacement. Depending on crew availability, that could mean hours of delay or even cancellation. He knew firsthand the challenges of crew scheduling. Airlines maintained a careful balance of active and reserve pilots, but unexpected events, particularly at busy hubs during deteriorating weather, could quickly deplete available resources. A medical emergency for the assigned captain, combined with the developing storm system, created a scenario where cancellation was a real possibility. Outside, the storm continued to intensify, lightning flashing ever closer, the rumble of thunder following more quickly each time. O'Hare's legendary delays were about to get worse as the weather deteriorated. For everyone aboard SkyWest 529, the day was rapidly moving from inconvenient to potentially disastrous. The cockpit door opened, and the gravity of the situation became immediately apparent. Captain Michael Hoffman was being carefully helped from his seat by paramedics. His face ashen, an oxygen mask already in place over his nose and mouth. A flight attendant held an IV bag above the captain's shoulder as the medical team eased him through the narrow cockpit entrance. The medical team moved with practiced efficiency, 2 paramedics supporting Hoffman while a third monitored vital signs on portable equipment. Their expressions were professionally neutral, but their urgency was evident in their movements and the clipped technical language they exchanged. BP 160 over 95, pulse 92, and irregular 1 reported quietly. 12 leads showing ST elevation. Another replied. "Let's get him transported ASAP." Their assessment, while couched in medical terminology, painted a clear picture for those familiar with cardiac events. Captain Hoffman was likely experiencing a heart attack, a situation requiring immediate hospital treatment. The sight of their captain, the person ultimately responsible for their safety, being removed for medical reasons, sent a ripple of anxiety through the passengers. Whispers and concerned glances bounced around the cabin like ricocheting bullets. Heart attack. Is he going to be okay? What does this mean for our flight? Alicia Morales maintained her professional composure as she addressed the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, Captain Hoffman is receiving medical attention. Your safety is our absolute priority, and we ask for your patience as we address this situation. Her voice remained steady, but those who worked closely with her could detect the concern beneath her professional veneer. In her 9 years as a flight attendant, she had never experienced a captain becoming incapacitated before departure. It was a scenario covered in training but rarely encountered in practice. In first class, Garrett Wilson's expression had transformed from irritation to alarm. The Nakamura deal was slipping further away with each passing minute. He pulled out his phone, ignoring the still active prohibition on cellular communications, and began typing furiously to his team in San Francisco. Delay. Captain medical emergency. Status uncertain. Prepare to request extension from Nakamura team. As he sent the message, he calculated alternate strategies. A private charter might be possible, though expensive and difficult to arrange on short notice. A later commercial flight would mean missing the scheduled meeting time. Video conferencing was technically possible, but strategically disadvantageous. Certain aspects of negotiation required physical presence, the ability to read the room, the psychological advantage of direct eye contact. In the cockpit, First Officer Nathan Thompson sat rigidly in his seat, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Though fully qualified to fly the aircraft, airline procedures required 2 pilots. Without a captain, the flight was grounded. Thompson had been through countless simulator scenarios involving pilot incapacitation during flight. But the situation unfolding now, a grounded aircraft, a developing storm, a cabin full of increasingly anxious passengers presented challenges that weren't covered in standard training. His previous excitement about the day's flight had been replaced by a mixture of concern for Captain Hoffman and uncertainty about what would happen next. A gate agent boarded the aircraft and made her way quickly to the front, conferring briefly with the lead flight attendant. Their expressions were grim. After a moment, the agent moved to the PA system. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Sandra from Gate Operations. I regret to inform you that Captain Hoffman has been taken ill and is unable to continue this flight. He is receiving excellent care, but this does create a challenging situation for our departure. Sandra Patel had been with SkyWest for 12 years, rising from check-in agent to senior gate manager. Her role required her to be the human face of the airline during disruptions, a position that demanded both empathy and authority. Today, those qualities would be tested to their limits. She paused, allowing the information to sink in before continuing. SkyWest is currently attempting to locate a reserve captain qualified on the A321. However, due to the weather system affecting much of the Midwest, many of our reserve crews are already assigned to other delayed flights. Another pause longer this time. The next words were clearly difficult to deliver. At this time, we must inform you that there is a significant possibility that Flight 529 will need to be canceled with passengers rebooked on later flights today or tomorrow morning. We sincerely apologize for this disruption to your travel plans. The reaction was immediate and vociferous. Several passengers stood up voicing protests and concerns about connections meetings and commitments. A businessman near the front demanded to speak to a supervisor. A mother with 2 small children burst into tears, explaining to anyone who would listen that they were traveling to her father's funeral. Throughout the cabin, the collective mood shifted from resignation to active frustration. The prospect of cancellation transformed the situation from a delay inconvenient but manageable to a major disruption with cascading personal and professional consequences. For some, it meant missed connections. For others, crucial events. For a few, genuine hardship. Wilson's reaction was among the most dramatic. He surged to his feet, face flushed with rage. "This is completely unacceptable," he shouted loud enough to be heard throughout the cabin. "You're telling me a multi-billion-dollar airline doesn't have a spare pilot? I have a meeting that represents over $1 billion in business. You can't just strand us here." His outburst gave voice to the frustrations many were feeling, though few would have expressed them so aggressively. Some passengers nodded in agreement with the sentiment, if not the delivery. Others winced at his tone, embarrassed by the public display of entitlement, even as they harbored similar concerns about their own disrupted plans. The gate agent maintained her composure, though her discomfort was evident. "Sir, I understand your frustration. We're doing everything possible to find a solution. The safety regulations are very clear. We cannot operate this aircraft without 2 qualified pilots." "Then find another pilot," Wilson demanded, as if the solution were obvious. "There must be someone in this entire airport who can fly this plane." As the chaos unfolded, Maxwell Reynolds sat quietly in row 12, processing the information. The situation was indeed dire. With the weather system moving and flights were being delayed and canceled across the region. Reserve pilots would be assigned to the highest priority routes first, and while San Francisco was important, it wasn't likely to be at the top of the list. His mind worked through the implications with the same methodical approach he applied to flight planning. The airline would be prioritizing full flights, international connections, and routes with limited alternative options. A domestic flight to a major hub like San Francisco, while important to those aboard, would likely rank lower in the operational triage currently underway at SkyWest's control center. He glanced out the window at the darkening sky, the rain now falling in sheets. Even if they found a replacement captain, the departure window was rapidly closing as the storm intensified. They might be looking at hours of ground hold even with a full crew. Maxwell also considered his own position. As a SkyWest captain qualified on the A321, he was precisely what they needed. Yet he hesitated to volunteer immediately, weighing the implications of such an action. It would mean sacrificing his brief vacation, certainly. More significantly, it would place him in command of an aircraft containing a passenger who had already demonstrated open hostility toward him, a complex dynamic with potential safety implications. His professional training emphasized the importance of a clear, focused cockpit environment, free from distractions or interpersonal tensions. The confrontation with Wilson had introduced precisely the kind of dynamic that good cockpit resource management sought to avoid. Camila Rodriguez, observing the unfolding drama, had shifted her focus from the earlier confrontation to this new development. The journalist in her recognized that she was witnessing a story with multiple compelling angles: the vulnerability of our transportation systems, the human impact of medical emergencies, the revealed character of people under stress. She watched as Wilson continued his tirade, noting how quickly his veneer of sophisticated professionalism had cracked under pressure. She also observed Maxwell's calm amid the chaos, a stark contrast to the panic and anger erupting around him. At the front of the aircraft, the gate agent was consulting her tablet, her expression suggesting the news wasn't improving. The minutes ticked by, each one reducing the chances of the flight departing at all, each one bringing the storm closer, each one pushing Garrett Wilson's critical meeting further out of reach. The atmosphere in the cabin had become a mixture of resignation and frustration, passengers torn between accepting the inevitable cancellation and hoping for an unexpected solution. Some were already on their phones exploring alternate travel arrangements. Others sat in stunned silence, processing the disruption to their carefully planned journeys. It was at this moment that Sandra, the gate agent, received an alert on her tablet. She studied it for a moment, her expression shifting from resignation to cautious optimism. After confirming something through her headset, she approached the PA system once more, her posture now slightly more upright, her manner more purposeful. "Ladies and gentlemen, we may have a potential solution," she announced immediately, capturing everyone's attention. "Please bear with us while we explore this possibility. Ladies and gentlemen." Sandra, the gate agent, addressed the increasingly restless cabin. "I have an update on our situation. Our operations team is working diligently to find a solution. We're currently cross-referencing our passenger manifest with our employee database." A murmur of confusion rippled through the cabin. Wilson, still standing despite repeated requests to be seated, called out. "What does that even mean?" Sandra explained. "In situations like this, we sometimes discover that we have off-duty crew members traveling as passengers. We're checking if we might have a qualified SkyWest pilot aboard who could potentially step in." This information brought a small wave of hope to the cabin. Passengers glanced around as if trying to identify who among them might secretly be a pilot. The possibility, however remote, of averting cancellation changed the emotional temperature of the aircraft frustration, giving way to cautious optimism, resignation to curiosity. The practice of identifying off-duty crew members to fill unexpected vacancies wasn't uncommon in the airline industry. Known informally as deadheading pilots and flight attendants, often traveled as passengers while positioning for assignments at other airports. Occasionally, these crew members could be pressed into service during staffing emergencies, though the likelihood of finding a fully qualified captain for a specific aircraft type among the general passenger population was slim. In row 12, Maxwell sat motionless, a subtle internal debate playing out behind his composed expression. As a senior captain qualified on the A321, he was exactly what they were looking for. He could step up, identify himself, and potentially save the flight. Yet years of experience had taught him to consider all angles before acting. If he volunteered, he would be giving up his short vacation. More significantly, he would be placing himself in command of an aircraft where one of the passengers had already demonstrated hostility toward him. The potential for further conflict was considerable. The cockpit of a commercial airliner required an environment of focused calm, where decisions could be made without distraction or emotional interference. Maxwell knew that residual tension from the confrontation with Wilson might affect that environment. It wasn't just a matter of personal comfort, but of operational safety. Emotional factors could influence decision-making in subtle but significant ways. Yet the weight of professional responsibility pressed on him. There were 178 other passengers aboard, many with important commitments. The mother traveling to her father's funeral, students returning to college, business people with meetings that, while perhaps not worth $1 billion, were still significant to them. As a senior captain, Maxwell had always viewed his role as a service position, not just operating the aircraft, but ensuring the needs of passengers were met whenever safely possible. That ethos now pulled him toward action, despite the personal and professional complications it might create. Near the front of the cabin, Wilson continued his complaints, now on the phone with someone apparently senior at SkyWest, having somehow obtained a direct number. "This is completely unacceptable," he was saying, his voice carrying through the cabin. "Your airline's incompetence is going to cost my firm millions. I want a solution now, not excuses about weather and regulations." His tone was commanding, as if he were speaking to a subordinate rather than a service provider. It was the voice of someone accustomed to bending organizations to his will through sheer force of personality and implied consequences. That approach had served him well in corporate boardrooms, but was proving less effective in the current situation where regulatory requirements and physical realities couldn't be negotiated away or intimidated into submission. Alicia Morales approached Maxwell's row, leaning down slightly as she passed. "Anything I can get you while we wait, sir?" She asked her standard question to all passengers, though her eyes held a particular sympathy for him after the earlier confrontation. Maxwell looked up at her, a decision crystallizing. "Actually," he said quietly, "could you let the gate agent know that I need to speak with her privately? It's regarding the crew situation." Alicia's eyes widened slightly in recognition. She gave an almost imperceptible nod before continuing down the aisle. Moments later, Sandra appeared at row 12, bending down to speak quietly with Maxwell. "Sir, you had information about the crew situation." Maxwell nodded, keeping his voice low. "I'm Captain Maxwell Reynolds, SkyWest Airlines. Senior Captain qualified on the A321 employee number 74521. I'd be willing to take command if needed." Sandra's expression transformed from polite inquiry to barely contained relief. "Captain Reynolds, thank you. Let me verify your credentials immediately." She stepped away, already reaching for her radio to communicate with operations. Her excitement was understandable. Finding a qualified captain among the passengers was like discovering water in a desert, an unexpected resolution to a situation that had seemed increasingly hopeless. For the airline, it meant avoiding the substantial costs and customer goodwill damage associated with cancellation. For the passengers, it meant continuing their journeys with minimal further delay. In the cockpit, First Officer Thompson was reviewing emergency diversion procedures when his radio crackled. "Sky West 529 operations. We may have a solution to your captain's situation. Stand by." Thompson responded immediately, hope evident in his voice. "Standing by operations. Good news would be very welcome right now." Minutes ticked by as verification proceeded. In the main cabin, passengers continued to express their frustration, unaware that a solution might be literally sitting among them. Wilson had returned to his seat, but continued his phone calls, his voice carrying despite attempts to speak quietly. The entire deal could collapse, he was saying. Nakamura's people are already looking for any excuse to back out or renegotiate terms. If I'm not there in person. His concerns, while expressed with his characteristic arrogance, weren't entirely unfounded. Major business negotiations often depended on timing, momentum, and the personal dynamics between key individuals. The physical presence of principal negotiators frequently made the difference between success and failure, particularly in cultures that placed high value on face-to-face interactions. Finally, Sandra returned to row 12, now accompanied by Alicia and another ground crew member. Her face wore a professional smile, but her eyes conveyed profound relief. "Captain Reynolds, we've confirmed your qualifications and active status. You're current on the A321, and your last simulator check was 3 weeks ago. If you're willing, Operations has authorized you to assume command of this flight pending verification from First Officer Thompson." Maxwell nodded, rising from his seat. "I'll need a few minutes to change and review the current status before making my decision. I'd like to speak with the first officer first." As he retrieved his carry-on from under the seat, removing a small kit bag that passengers around him now realized contained a pilot's uniform, a wave of whispers spread through the nearby rows. Those who had witnessed the earlier confrontation with Wilson began connecting the dots, their expressions ranging from amazement to vindication. Camila Rodriguez, recognizing the significance of what was unfolding, discreetly resumed recording. This was no longer just a story about a nasty encounter between passengers. It was transforming before her eyes into something far more powerful, a narrative about prejudice, assumption, competence, and justice. The man who had been told to get off this plane was now potentially going to be the one flying it, a reversal so perfect in its poetic justice that it seemed almost scripted. As a journalist focused on the intersection of social media and accountability, Camila recognized the rare narrative power of the situation unfolding before her. It contained all the elements that resonated in the digital age: clear moral dynamics, ironic reversal, visual documentation, and the possibility of immediate consequences for prejudiced behavior. She knew that the video she had captured, combined with this extraordinary development, would likely spread rapidly across social platforms, sparking discussions about bias, assumption, and the ways in which people's capabilities are often misjudged based on appearance. It was precisely the kind of real-world incident that could illuminate broader social patterns, making abstract concepts like prejudice concrete and undeniable through specific example. As Maxwell prepared to follow Sandra toward the cockpit, passengers began to understand what was happening. The realization spread through the cabin in waves of whispered explanations, wide-eyed looks, and subtle gestures toward row 12. The earlier confrontation witnessed by many but understood fully by few was now being recontextualized in light of this new information. The narrative was rewriting itself before their eyes. For those who had observed Wilson's behavior, the irony was impossible to miss. The man who had dismissively ordered Maxwell to get off this plane was now dependent on him to fly it. The reversal contained elements of both comedy and morality tale, a real-time lesson in the dangers of assumption and the unpredictability of consequence. "We are looking for a passenger by the name of Maxwell Reynolds." The gate agent's voice over the PA system cut through the cabin noise like a spotlight searching through darkness. All conversation ceased as passengers curious about this unexpected announcement looked around. In row 12, Maxwell stood up calmly. "I'm Maxwell Reynolds," he said, his voice carrying in the sudden silence. Every head in the vicinity turned toward him. The transformation in the atmosphere was immediate and palpable. Those who had witnessed Wilson's earlier behavior gasped audibly. Others, who had only heard snippets of the confrontation, leaned forward in their seats, sensing they were witnessing something significant. Sandra approached him with newfound deference. "Captain Reynolds, if you could come with me, please. First Officer Thompson is waiting to speak with you in the cockpit." As Maxwell stepped into the aisle, his bearing subtly shifted. Though still in his casual Hawaiian shirt and slacks, something in his posture, his gaze, the set of his shoulders radiated quiet authority. It wasn't an act or a performance, it was simply the natural emergence of his professional self. He retrieved his carry-on bag from under the seat, opening it to reveal a neatly folded uniform shirt with 4 gold stripes on each shoulder, the mark of a senior captain. Alongside it was a pair of black dress shoes polished to a professional shine. The contents of his bag suddenly made perfect sense. These weren't just clothing items, but the symbols of his profession. The uniform of a man who routinely commanded aircraft worth hundreds of millions of dollars and bore responsibility for hundreds of lives. Passengers who could see this transformation watched in stunned silence. A few began to whisper to those who couldn't see, spreading the news throughout the cabin. "The guy Wilson yelled at is a pilot. He's the captain. He's going to fly the plane." The story traveled rapidly through the rows, gaining details and emphasis with each retelling. By the time it reached the back of the aircraft, the narrative had crystallized into its most dramatic form. The man who got told to get off this plane is now going to fly it. Camilla, still recording, captured the reactions of those around her. An older woman shaking her head in disbelief, a businessman closing his eyes in second-hand embarrassment, a young man grinning at the cosmic justice unfolding before them. These were the human responses that would contextualize the incident when her video eventually reached a wider audience, providing emotional anchors that viewers would identify with and share. As Maxwell made his way forward, passengers began to realize what was happening. A smattering of applause broke out, growing louder as more joined in. Someone called out, "Thank you, Captain." Another voice added, "Get us to San Francisco, sir." The supportive reaction seemed to embarrass Maxwell slightly. He gave a small, acknowledging nod but maintained his focus, moving purposefully toward the cockpit. This wasn't a moment of triumph for him, but simply a professional responding to a situation where his skills were needed. The attention and applause, while well-intentioned, were secondary to the task at hand. When he passed row 3, Garrett Wilson was staring fixedly out the window, deliberately avoiding eye contact. But the rigid set of his shoulders and the white-knuckled grip on his armrest betrayed his awareness. His face had drained of color, the earlier flush of anger replaced by the pallor of mortification. For a brief moment, their eyes inadvertently met. In that fraction of a second, an entire conversation transpired without words. Maxwell's gaze held no triumph, no smugness, no desire for revenge, only the steady professional focus of a man about to assume a significant responsibility. Wilson's eyes, by contrast, reflected a complex storm of emotions: shock, embarrassment, fear, and the dawning realization that he had publicly demeaned the very person upon whom his safety and his precious meeting now depended. The moment contained both cosmic irony and profound life lesson. Wilson, who had invested so heavily in the trappings and appearance of success, the expensive suit, the executive demeanor, the commanding presence, had dismissed Maxwell based on his casual attire and race, assuming he was unimportant. Now, that assumption had been not just challenged, but dramatically inverted, revealing the hollowness of judging capability and worth based on superficial factors. Maxwell continued forward without breaking stride, not giving Wilson the satisfaction of a confrontation or the relief of an acknowledgement. In that moment, the power dynamic had been completely inverted. Wilson, who had attempted to humiliate Maxwell based on appearances, was now facing the consequences of his prejudice in the most public and undeniable way possible. At the front of the aircraft, Maxwell was met by First Officer Thompson, who extended his hand with professional respect. "Captain Reynolds, Nathan Thompson. Thank you for stepping up, sir." Maxwell shook his hand firmly. "Let's talk in the flight deck, First Officer. I need to understand our current situation before making any decisions." The two men disappeared into the cockpit, closing the door behind them. The solid click of the latch resonated throughout the cabin, a sound that normally went unnoticed but now seemed to carry symbolic weight. It represented the separation between the professional environment of the flight deck and the social dynamics of the passenger cabin, between operational reality and personal drama. As they disappeared from view, the cabin erupted into animated conversation. The story spread rapidly from row to row, embellished slightly with each retelling, but the essential truth remained intact. The man who had been told to get off the plane was now the one who would fly it. Can you believe it? That executive guy told him to get off the plane, and he turned out to be a pilot. Not just a pilot. The captain. Talk about karma. In first class, Garrett Wilson sat frozen in his seat, the full impact of what had just occurred washing over him in waves. He had publicly berated a senior airline captain. He had demanded that a highly trained professional know his place. He had exposed his prejudice for all to see. And now his fate, his safety, his crucial business meeting, his very reputation rested in the hands of the man he had tried to humiliate. The cosmic irony was not lost on the other passengers. In seat 14D, Camila Rodriguez was already crafting the narrative in her mind. The man who yelled, "Get off this plane," discovers who's really in command. It was the kind of story that wrote itself a perfect encapsulation of prejudice confronted by quiet competence. Outside, the storm continued to build dark clouds, towering over O'Hare, lightning flickering between them like nervous energy. But inside SkyWest, Flight 529, a different kind of energy was building: anticipation, curiosity, and for many a sense of witnessing justice unfold in real time. The passengers settled into a new phase of waiting, but the quality of the wait had transformed. What had been frustrated resignation was now hopeful anticipation. They had witnessed something extraordinary, a moment where assumption had been exposed, where capability had trumped appearance, where the social masks people wore had been momentarily stripped away to reveal deeper truths about character and competence. In the coming days, many would recount this experience to friends, family, and colleagues. Some would focus on the operational aspects, how an airline had improvised a solution to an unexpected challenge. Others would emphasize the human drama, the confrontation, the reversal, the public reckoning. But all would recognize that they had witnessed something rare, a moment where the gap between appearance and reality had been exposed in the most dramatic and undeniable way possible. Part 4. Maxwell in command. The cockpit of the A321 was a sanctuary of technology and discipline. As Maxwell closed the door behind him, the noise of the passenger cabin faded, replaced by the muted hum of avionics and the focused atmosphere of the flight deck. First Officer Nathan Thompson was already in the right seat, organizing charts and reviewing the departure procedure. Captain Thompson greeted him, the title now carrying its proper weight. Weather's deteriorating faster than forecast. ATC is offering an immediate departure if we're ready, otherwise we might be looking at a ground hold. Maxwell took his place in the left seat, the captain's position with practiced ease. His fingers moved across the instrument panel in a familiar dance checking settings, verifying systems establishing his command of the aircraft. Despite the unusual circumstances of his assumption of command, there was nothing unusual about his methodical approach. The captain's seat felt natural to him, the position from which he had logged thousands of hours guiding aircraft safely through challenges far more severe than today's weather. Each switch dial and screen was exactly where muscle memory expected it to be, the standardized layout of the Airbus cockpit, ensuring that pilots could transition between specific airframes with minimal adaptation. "Let's not waste the opportunity," Maxwell replied, already donning his headset. "Run through the pre-taxi checklist while I get caught up on our flight plan." Thompson nodded, appreciating the clear direction. As a relatively new first officer, he found reassurance in Maxwell's calm confidence, especially after the stress of Captain Hoffman's medical emergency. Pre-taxi checklist. Flight controls, checked and free. Instruments, cross-checked and set. Altimeters 29.92 cross-checked. Maxwell quickly reviewed the flight documents, the planned route fuel calculations, weather forecasts, and aircraft weight and balance. His eyes narrowed slightly as he studied the weather radar display. "We've got a significant system building," he noted. "I see why ATC is eager to get us out. Once this fully develops, departures are going to be severely restricted." He noticed something else as he reviewed the flight plan, a subtle anomaly in the fuel trim setting that both Hoffman and the ground crew had missed. Not dangerous, but the kind of detail that separated good pilots from exceptional ones. "Nathan, let's adjust the fuel trim setting for Engine 2, Maxwell said. "It's within limits but a little asymmetrical. Might explain the vibration Hoffman felt." Thompson looked up surprised. "Good catch, Captain. That wasn't in the maintenance report. It was a small moment, but it established an important dynamic between the two pilots." Maxwell had demonstrated both technical expertise and attention to detail, earning Thompson's professional respect in a way that formal rank alone couldn't achieve. In the cockpit, actual knowledge trumped theoretical authority, a reversal of the dynamic Wilson had attempted to establish in the cabin, where appearance and assertion had substituted for legitimate capability. Maxwell made the adjustment, then continued with his review. Every action was smooth, efficient, the result of years of experience. There was no showmanship, no unnecessary movement, just the quiet competence of a master practitioner at work. As they completed the pre-departure checks, Maxwell paused, looking thoughtfully at Thompson. "First time dealing with a medical emergency in the cockpit." Thompson nodded, his earlier stress briefly visible again. "Yes, sir. 1 minute we were reviewing the checklist, the next. I've never seen someone deteriorate so quickly." "You handled it well," Maxwell assured him. "Made the right call getting medical assistance immediately. That's what good cockpit resource management looks like, recognizing when something's wrong and taking decisive action." The young first officer straightened slightly at the praise his confidence visibly bolstered. "Thank you, sir." This brief exchange accomplished something important, establishing the foundation of trust and mutual respect essential between pilots who literally hold lives in their hands. Maxwell had acknowledged Thompson's correct action while subtly reinforcing the core principle of aviation safety, prioritizing the right decision over concerns about appearance, inconvenience, or personal ego. Maxwell continued, his voice matter-of-fact but supportive. "We've got some challenging weather ahead and a cabin full of stressed passengers. I'm going to need you sharp and focused. Can you give me that?" "Absolutely, Captain," Thompson replied, his earlier uncertainty replaced by determination. Maxwell nodded, satisfied. In less than 5 minutes, he had not only assumed command of the aircraft, but had also established the foundation of trust essential between pilots who literally hold lives in their hands. It was leadership in its purest form, clear, supportive, and focused on the mission. The cockpit environment had been transformed from the uncertainty that had prevailed after Captain Hoffman's departure to a space of focused professionalism. The flight deck of a commercial airliner was designed to be a sanctuary of rationality and procedure, where decisions were made based on data and established protocols, rather than emotion or personal dynamics. Maxwell had restored that essential environment through his calm competence and clear communication. He reached for the PA system. It was time to address the passengers to set the tone for the flight ahead. As his finger pressed the button, he was acutely aware that somewhere in the cabin, Garrett Wilson would be listening to his voice. The voice of the man he had tried to dismiss, now speaking with the unquestionable authority of the captain's seat. Maxwell took a moment to organize his thoughts. The announcement he was about to make would not only provide necessary information to the passengers, but would establish the tone for the entire flight. His words would be scrutinized not just for their content, but for any hint of the personal drama that had preceded his assumption of command. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Maxwell Reynolds." His voice carried the calm authority that had been honed through thousands of similar announcements, the voice of someone for whom responsibility was not a burden, but a natural state. There was no hint of the confrontation that had occurred earlier. No suggestion of personal vindication, only the professional focus of a captain concerned with the safe and efficient operation of his aircraft. In that moment, Maxwell demonstrated the principle that had guided his entire career: the mission transcends the personal. Whatever emotions he might privately hold about Wilson's behavior, they had no place in his execution of his professional duties. The 179 souls now under his care deserved his full attention and best judgment, uncompromised by personal feelings or desire for vindication. As he completed the announcement and returned to the pre-departure procedures, Maxwell knew that the next few hours would test both his flying skills and his emotional discipline. The weather ahead promised significant challenges, and the human dynamics in the cabin added an unusual layer of complexity. But he was prepared for both his thousands of hours in the cockpit, having equipped him to navigate not just the physical turbulence of the atmosphere, but the more subtle turbulence of human interaction under stress. Flight deck. "This is ground control. SkyWest 529, you are cleared to push back. Taxi to runway 28R via taxiway Alpha Charlie Foxtrot. Be advised, weather is moving in rapidly. Expect an expedited departure." Maxwell acknowledged the clearance, his voice calm and professional. "Ground SkyWest 529 understood. Pushing back now, taxi to 28R via Alpha Charlie Foxtrot." He nodded to Thompson. "Let's get moving. I want to be airborne before that cell hits the field." The aircraft began its push back from the gate, the gentle backward momentum felt throughout the cabin. Rain hammered against the cockpit windows with increasing intensity, the wipers working steadily to maintain visibility. Outside the airport, operations continued despite the deteriorating weather. Ground crews in bright yellow rain gear guided aircraft along taxiways. Baggage handlers loaded cargo holds and fuel trucks serviced waiting planes. The storm was visibly intensifying, darker clouds building to the west, lightning flashing more frequently, the rain becoming a steady downpour that reduced visibility and created reflective pools on the tarmac. As they taxied, Maxwell conducted another thorough systems check, paying particular attention to the engine parameters that had concerned Captain Hoffman. The adjustment to the fuel trim seemed to have resolved the asymmetry, but Maxwell remained vigilant. He had developed an almost intuitive feel for aircraft behavior over his thousands of hours in command, a sense for when something wasn't quite right. "Engine 2 parameters. Looking normal now." Thompson reported, monitoring the displays. Vibration levels within standard range. Maxwell nodded, satisfied but not complacent. "Keep an eye on it during takeoff. If you notice any anomalies, call them out immediately." This instruction reflected a fundamental principle of effective cockpit management: the encouragement of open communication regardless of rank. An aviation hierarchy existed alongside a culture that empowered any crew member to speak up about safety concerns. It was a balance that Maxwell had always maintained in his cockpit, creating an environment where observation trumped authority when safety was at stake. The taxi proceeded swiftly, ground control expediting their movement through the busy airport. Outside, the storm's intensity was building visibly. Lightning flashed across the sky with increasing frequency, the time between flash and thunder diminishing as the storm approached. Maxwell studied the weather radar, noting the rapidly developing cells. The decision to depart now involved careful risk assessment, balancing the hazards of taking off in deteriorating conditions against the potential for extended ground delays if they missed their departure window. It was the kind of complex judgment call that defined the captain's role, where experience and intuition complemented technical knowledge. In the main cabin, passengers felt the aircraft's movement and watched the deteriorating conditions through rain-streaked windows. The usual pre-takeoff anxiety was amplified by the visible storm and the unusual circumstances of their departure. Alicia moved efficiently through the cabin, conducting a final check before takeoff. When she reached first class, she found Garrett Wilson gripping his armrests tightly, his earlier arrogance replaced by evident discomfort. She noticed his knuckles were white, his jaw clenched. "Sir, please ensure your seatbelt is fastened securely," she said professionally. "We're expecting some turbulence during takeoff due to the weather." Wilson nodded stiffly, unable to meet her eyes. The man who had been so vocal, so demanding earlier, now seemed diminished, his confidence eroded by the dramatic reversal of circumstances. Back in the cockpit, Maxwell and Thompson completed the pre-takeoff checklist as they approached the runway. The tower frequency crackled with urgent communications as controllers worked to move aircraft safely amidst the developing weather. SkyWest 529 Tower, you are cleared for immediate takeoff runway 28R. Wind 290 at 22 knots, gusting to 35. Caution for wind shear on departure. Good day. The wind information was significant. 22 knots was substantial, and gusts to 35 approached the crosswind limitations of the aircraft. Wind shear, a sudden change in wind direction or speed, represented one of the most serious hazards during takeoff and landing. The controller's warning confirmed what Maxwell could see through the rain-streaked windshield. Conditions were deteriorating rapidly. Maxwell acknowledged the clearance and smoothly maneuvered the aircraft onto the runway centerline. The rain was now torrential, visibility reduced to the minimum required for takeoff. Behind them, lightning illuminated the airport, briefly turning night to day. "Ready?" Nathan Maxwell asked, his hand on the throttles. "Ready," Captain Thompson confirmed, his focus intense. Maxwell advanced the throttles smoothly, feeling the powerful engines respond. "Takeoff power set." The aircraft began accelerating down the runway, gathering speed as the engines strained against the weather. Thompson called out the speeds as they approached the critical moment of decision. 80 knots, V1, the decision speed, the point after which they were committed to takeoff. Rotate. Maxwell pulled back on the side stick with practiced precision, feeling the aircraft respond as the nose lifted. There was a moment of increased vibration as they transitioned from ground to air, not unusual in gusty conditions but more pronounced than normal. "Positive rate," Thompson confirmed as the altimeter began to show their climb. "Gear up." Maxwell ordered, his focus absolute as he guided the aircraft through the turbulent air surrounding the airport. The landing gear retracted with a reassuring thunk felt throughout the cabin. They were airborne, climbing away from O'Hare into the teeth of the storm. The aircraft bucked and swayed in the turbulent air, requiring all of Maxwell's skill to maintain a stable flight path. Engine 2 vibration increasing. Thompson reported, his voice tense but controlled. Maxwell glanced at the engine display. The parameters were fluctuating, approaching but not exceeding limits. He made a minute adjustment to the throttle setting, feeling rather than seeing the change in the aircraft's behavior. "Monitor closely," he instructed. "If it exceeds 2.5 units, we'll reduce power and level off." The radio crackled with an urgent transmission from ATC. "SkyWest 529, we're showing a significant weather cell directly in your path. Recommend immediate right turn to heading 330 to avoid." Sky West, 529 turning right to 330. Maxwell responded, already initiating the turn. The aircraft banked smoothly despite the turbulence, responsive to his expert handling. The maneuver took them north of the worst weather, though the ride remained rough. Rain lashed against the aircraft, occasional flashes of lightning illuminating the cockpit. Throughout, Maxwell maintained precise control, his hands steady on the controls, his voice calm as he communicated with ATC and directed Thompson. In the cabin, passengers felt every bump and drop. Some gripped their armrests, others closed their eyes, a few murmured prayers. The normal sounds of takeoff were punctuated by gasps and nervous laughter as the aircraft navigated the turbulent air. Garrett Wilson, who typically prided himself on being unflappable, found himself in the grip of profound anxiety. Each shake of the aircraft, each flash of lightning visible through his window, reinforced his complete lack of control over the situation. The realization that his safety, his very life, now depended entirely on the skill of a man he had demeaned, was a bitter pill to swallow. Gradually, the ride began to smooth as they climbed through 10,000 feet. They had successfully navigated the worst of the departure weather, though the flight path ahead still showed significant challenges over the Rockies. Maxwell keyed the PA system. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reynolds. We've managed to thread our way through the worst of the weather around Chicago and are now climbing to our cruising altitude of 36,000 feet. The seatbelt sign will remain on as we're expecting continued turbulence during our climb. Once we reach our cruise altitude, we'll reassess and let you know when it's safe to move about the cabin. Flight attendants remain seated for now." His voice through the speakers was the embodiment of calm professionalism, steady, authoritative, reassuring. There was no hint of the drama that had preceded their departure, no suggestion that anything other than routine professionalism was guiding the flight. Back in the cockpit, Thompson let out a small sigh of relief as they continued their climb into clearer air. "Nice job navigating that cell, Captain. That was some impressive flying." Maxwell nodded, his focus still on the instruments and the weather radar. "The forecast for the Rockies doesn't look much better. We might need to deviate further north than planned to avoid the worst of it." He made a minor adjustment to their heading, constantly thinking several steps ahead, a characteristic of exceptional pilots. Maxwell was already planning their approach into San Francisco, considering fuel reserves, potential alternate airports, and the comfort of his passengers. "Engine 2 parameters have stabilized." Thompson reported, monitoring the displays that had shown concerning fluctuations during takeoff. "Vibration levels back in the normal range." "Good," Maxwell replied. "Let's run a full systems check now that we're in smoother air. I want to be certain we're not going to have any surprises later." As they methodically verified each aircraft system, Maxwell reflected briefly on the unusual circumstances that had placed him in command. In 17 years of commercial flying, he had encountered prejudice in many forms, but rarely had the consequences been so immediately and dramatically reversed. Yet he took no satisfaction in Wilson's discomfort. For Maxwell, this wasn't about vindication or revenge. It was about fulfilling his professional responsibility, about getting 179 people safely to their destination. The aircraft continued its climb toward cruising altitude, gradually leaving the worst of the Chicago weather behind, though the challenges of the journey were far from over. In the main cabin of SkyWest Flight 529, passengers gradually began to relax as the violent turbulence of takeoff gave way to the more manageable bumps of normal flight. Seatbelt signs remained illuminated, but the immediate sense of danger had passed. A collective sigh of relief seemed to move through the aircraft as the worst of the Chicago storm fell behind them. Sunlight streamed through the windows on the right side of the aircraft as they climbed above the storm system. The contrast between the dark clouds below and the brilliant blue above creating a stunning visual reminder of the different worlds that existed just a few thousand feet apart. Several passengers took photos of the dramatic cloudscape, momentarily distracted from the earlier tension by the natural beauty visible from their unique vantage point. Alicia Morales moved through the forward cabin as soon as conditions permitted, checking on passengers and offering reassurance. When she reached first class, she found Garrett Wilson still rigid in his seat, staring fixedly at the back of the seat in front of him. "Sir, can I get you anything?" she asked, maintaining her professional demeanor despite knowing what he had done earlier. Wilson shook his head stiffly, not making eye contact. The transformation in his demeanor was striking, from aggressive entitlement to muted discomfort. He had not spoken a word since the revelation about Maxwell's identity, as if language itself had abandoned him in his humiliation. His mind was racing with conflicting thoughts and emotions. The Nakamura deal, the focus that had consumed him all morning, now seemed simultaneously crucial and trivial. He was still processing the public exposure of his prejudice, the dramatic reversal of status, and the uncomfortable realization that his safety now depended entirely on the competence of a man he had dismissed based on appearance. Other first-class passengers maintained a careful distance from Wilson, both physically and socially. The unspoken bonds that typically united premium cabin travelers, the mutual recognition of status, the shared understanding of privilege, had been severed by his behavior. He had violated the unstated code of the elite traveler: maintain composure, respect boundaries, display sophistication. His outburst had marked him as unpredictable and uncouth, qualities that business-class society found more disturbing than the prejudice itself. Back in row 14, Camila Rodriguez had shifted her attention from documenting the human drama to considering its broader implications. As a journalist focused on social justice issues, she recognized the rich narrative unfolding around her: a black professional subjected to casual racism only for the power dynamic to be dramatically reversed when his true expertise was revealed. The story practically wrote itself, but Camila was careful to consider the ethical dimensions of her reporting. This wasn't just about exposing Wilson's behavior, it was about highlighting the broader pattern it represented. She had already uploaded a brief clip to her social media accounts before takeoff, capturing the initial confrontation. Now, with the aircraft's Wi-Fi activated, she could see that the video was gaining significant traction. Thousands of views within the first hour, accompanied by comments expressing outrage at Wilson's behavior and satisfaction at the ironic reversal. She began typing notes on her laptop, organizing her thoughts for the article she planned to write. The working title formed in her mind: "Get Off This Plane." When prejudice meets competence at 35,000 feet. The story contained elements that resonated deeply in contemporary society: the exposure of everyday prejudice, the vindication of merit over assumption, the democratizing power of social media to document injustice. Meanwhile, Maxwell's voice came over the PA system again, his tone measured and informative. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reynolds again. We've reached our initial cruising altitude of 32,000 feet and are now over western Iowa. We're going to maintain the seatbelt sign for a while longer as we're still experiencing some light turbulence. Our flight attendants will begin beverage service shortly. Our estimated arrival time in San Francisco is 1:27 p.m. Pacific time." The mention of the arrival time caused Wilson to check his watch anxiously. His meeting with the Nakamura team was scheduled for 3 p.m. Even with the delay, he should still make it, assuming there were no further complications. But the relief this realization should have brought was overshadowed by the knowledge that his arrival time, indeed his entire professional future, now rested in the hands of a man he had publicly demeaned. As the flight progressed westward, Alicia began the beverage service, moving efficiently through the cabin. Passengers, grateful to be airborne after the uncertainty of the morning, were generally in better spirits. Many discussed the unusual circumstances of their departure, the story of Maxwell's elevation from passenger to captain spreading throughout the aircraft, embellished slightly with each retelling. When she reached Camila's row, Alicia paused slightly longer than necessary. "Can I get you something to drink?" Camila looked up from her laptop. "Just water, please." That was quite a takeoff. Alicia nodded, lowering her voice slightly. "Captain Reynolds is one of our best. We're lucky he was aboard." Her eyes flicked briefly to Camilla's screen where notes about the incident were visible. "Quite a story, isn't it?" "One worth telling," Camilla replied, quietly accepting the water. "Do you know if the captain will be making any statement about what happened?" Alicia shook her head. "I doubt it. He's not the type to draw attention to himself, even in situations where others might." This insight only deepened Camilla's interest in the narrative. The contrast between Wilson's loud demands for recognition and Maxwell's quiet competence was striking a counterpoint that would resonate with readers. It illustrated a broader truth about how different types of people navigated professional spaces and claimed authority within them. In the cockpit, Maxwell and Thompson were reviewing the weather systems ahead. The radar showed significant thunderstorm activity over the Rocky Mountains, not unusual for this time of year, but certainly challenging to navigate. "I'm thinking we should request a routing further north," Maxwell said, studying the display. "That would take us over southern Wyoming instead of Colorado. Looks clearer, though we'll add about 15 minutes to our flight time." Thompson nodded in agreement. "The Colorado route looks pretty congested with cells. North seems safer." Maxwell keyed the radio to make the request to air traffic control. His decision reflected his philosophy as a pilot. Safety always came first, even if it meant a slightly longer flight time. He knew some captains might try to punch through the weather to maintain schedule, but Maxwell had never been willing to compromise safety margins for convenience. As they received clearance for the northern routing, Maxwell glanced at the fuel calculations. The diversion would use additional fuel, but they still had plenty of reserves. Every decision he made was methodical, carefully considered the result of years of experience and training. He thought briefly about the unusual circumstances that had placed him in command. Throughout his career, Maxwell had faced countless situations where his capabilities were questioned or doubted because of his race. He had learned to navigate these challenges through consistent excellence, letting his performance speak in place of defensiveness or anger. Today's dramatic reversal was merely the most public example of a pattern he had experienced many times. Initial assumption based on appearance, followed by reassessment based on demonstrated competence. In row 3, Wilson finally reached for his phone, sending another update to his team in San Francisco ETA, now 1:30 p.m. Encountering weather issues. Will update if further delays. The response was immediate and did nothing to ease his anxiety. Nakamura team inquiring about delay. Growing impatient. CEO specifically asking for you by name. Critical you arrive ASAP. Wilson closed his eyes briefly, the pressure mounting. His entire career trajectory hinged on this meeting on closing this deal. The Nakamura merger wasn't just another acquisition. It was the capstone achievement that would cement his legacy at Pinnacle Capital. And now, the timing of his arrival, the very possibility of the meeting occurring at all, depended entirely on the man he had ordered off the plane. The irony wasn't lost on Wilson. In his world of high finance, he was accustomed to being the one with power, the one who made decisions that affected others' lives and livelihoods. Now the tables had turned completely. His powerlessness in this situation was a new and deeply uncomfortable experience. As the aircraft continued westward, the passengers of SkyWest 529 settled into the routine of flight, unaware of the significant weather challenges that still lay ahead. Challenges that would test Captain Maxwell Reynolds' skills to their limits and force Garrett Wilson to confront the full consequences of his earlier behavior. The first indication of trouble came as SkyWest 529 approached the eastern edge of the Rocky Mountains. What had appeared on radar as scattered thunderstorms was revealing itself to be a more organized and volatile system. Dark, anvil-shaped clouds towered ahead their tops, reaching far above the aircraft's cruising altitude, their bases obscured by curtains of heavy precipitation. The Rocky Mountains themselves contributed to the weather's intensity, their massive forms disrupting air currents and creating powerful updrafts that fed the growing thunderstorms. The combination of geographic features and atmospheric conditions had created a formidable barrier across the aircraft's path, a challenge that would require all of Maxwell's skill and experience to navigate safely. In the cockpit, Maxwell studied the weather radar with growing concern. The northern routing he had requested was still clearer than the direct path, but even this alternative route now showed significant weather activity. Denver Center SkyWest 529, Maxwell radioed. "We're seeing some significant weather ahead, requesting deviation 20 degrees further north." SkyWest 529, Denver Center came the controller's response. "Deviation approved. Be advised, we're getting reports of severe turbulence at all altitudes between flight levels 290 and 380 throughout the region. Multiple aircraft are diverting or requesting significant course changes." Maxwell acknowledged the information, his expression serious as he turned to Thompson. "This system is more extensive than forecast. We might need to consider additional options if conditions worsen." Thompson nodded, running calculations on the flight management computer. "If we go too far north, we'll start to impact our fuel reserves for San Francisco. We should identify potential alternates in case we need to divert." "Agreed," Maxwell replied. "Let's look at Salt Lake City and Reno as our primary alternates." This conversation reflected a fundamental aspect of commercial aviation, the continuous assessment of conditions and alternatives, the constant balance of various factors, including safety, efficiency, passenger comfort, and operational constraints. Every decision represented a complex calculation of risks and benefits guided by both regulatory requirements and professional judgment. As they discussed contingency plans, the aircraft encountered the first outer bands of turbulence. It wasn't severe yet, but the distinct bumps and occasional drops signaled they were entering a more volatile air mass. Maxwell keyed the PA system. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reynolds. We're beginning to encounter some turbulence as we approach the Rocky Mountains. I've illuminated the fasten seatbelt sign, so please return to your seats and secure your seatbelts. Flight attendants, please suspend service and secure the cabin." Throughout the aircraft, passengers responded to the announcement. Those who had been standing quickly returned to their seats. Alicia and the other flight attendants efficiently stowed service items and checked that seatbelts were fastened. "Is this normal?" a nervous passenger asked Alicia as she checked his row. "Completely normal," she assured him with practiced calm. "Captain Reynolds is one of our most experienced pilots. He'll find us the smoothest route possible." In first class, Garrett Wilson gripped his armrests tightly as the aircraft began to buck and sway more noticeably. Unlike many business travelers who flew constantly, Wilson rarely took commercial flights, preferring the comfort and status of private jets. The unfamiliar sensation of significant turbulence added to his already considerable stress. He checked his watch again, a nervous habit that was becoming more frequent as the flight progressed. It was now 11:15 a.m. Central Time. If they maintained their estimated arrival of 1:30 p.m. Pacific, he would still have time to reach the Nakamura meeting. But every deviation, every delay eroded that buffer. The Nakamura merger represented not just a business transaction, but the culmination of Wilson's professional ambition. As the architect of the deal, he stood to receive not only substantial financial rewards, a bonus potentially reaching 8 figures, but also the professional recognition that would secure his position in the upper echelons of financial dealmakers. The prospect of this achievement slipping away because of weather and the earlier confrontation added a layer of anxiety that manifested physically in his white-knuckled grip on the armrests. In row 14, Camilla continued writing, though the increasing turbulence made typing challenging. She noticed the reactions of those around her, some calm and seemingly unbothered, others white-knuckled and tense. Human behavior in stressful situations had always fascinated her as a journalist, and the airplane provided a perfect laboratory, a confined space where people from different backgrounds were equally subject to forces beyond their control. She had nearly completed her article, pulling together the various strands of the narrative: the initial confrontation, the dramatic revelation of Maxwell's identity, the ironic reversal of power dynamics, and the broader implications for how prejudice operates in professional contexts. Her piece would go beyond simply documenting what had happened to explore why it resonated so powerfully, why the story seemed to crystallize issues that extended far beyond this specific incident. In the cockpit, Maxwell and Thompson worked in seamless coordination, constantly evaluating weather data, communicating with air traffic control, and adjusting their route to find the least turbulent path through the mountain weather. "Cells are building faster than they're dissipating," Thompson noted, monitoring the radar. "The gap we were aiming for is closing." Maxwell nodded, already formulating an alternative plan. "We'll need to climb. Request FL 380 from ATC. Let's get above as much of this as possible." As Thompson made the request, Maxwell adjusted engine settings in preparation for the climb. His hands moved with practiced precision, each adjustment calculated and deliberate. Despite the challenging conditions, his demeanor remained calm, his breathing steady. This was the environment where Maxwell Reynolds excelled, where his thousands of hours of experience translated into instinctive expertise. SkyWest 529, climb and maintain flight level 380 approved, came the clearance from Denver Center. Maxwell initiated the climb, the aircraft's nose pitching up slightly as they began to ascend above the worst of the turbulence. For a few minutes, it seemed the strategy would work. The ride smoothed somewhat as they gained altitude, putting more distance between them and the most volatile air. Then, without warning, they hit a powerful updraft followed immediately by its opposite, a downdraft that caused the aircraft to drop suddenly. In the cabin, unsecured items flew upward, then crashed back down. Several passengers gasped or cried out in alarm. A child began crying somewhere in the back. "Severe turbulence," Maxwell announced calmly to Thompson, though the statement was unnecessary. Both pilots were fully focused on maintaining aircraft control through the violent air movements. The Airbus A321 was designed to withstand far greater stresses than it was currently experiencing. Its flexible wings, advanced flight control systems, and robust structure provided significant safety margins. Yet the sensation for those on board was undeniably alarming, the sudden drops and jolts creating a visceral response that bypassed rational understanding of aviation safety. In the cabin, the sudden drop had a profound effect on passengers' nerves. Even those who had been relaxed were now fully alert, many saying silent prayers or clutching armrests with renewed vigor. Alicia moved through the forward cabin when possible, offering reassurance where needed, though she too was required to remain seated during the worst of the turbulence. Garrett Wilson, who had been managing his anxiety with moderate success, felt his composure shatter with the sudden drop. A visible sheen of sweat appeared on his forehead, and his breathing became rapid and shallow, the early signs of a panic attack. The physical symptoms were accompanied by a cascade of catastrophic thoughts. What if the plane breaks apart? What if we crash? What if I die here? These fears, while statistically unfounded, felt overwhelming in the moment. The loss of control, both literal and metaphorical, was particularly distressing for a man whose identity was built around mastery and dominance of his environment. The aircraft continued to buck and shudder as Maxwell guided it through the chaotic air currents surrounding the Rocky Mountain storm system. Each movement of his hands on the controls was minimal but precise, counteracting the turbulent forces with just enough input to maintain stability without over-controlling. "We need to get through this cell before we hit the next one," Maxwell said to Thompson, studying the radar. "There's clearer air about 80 miles ahead." Thompson, despite his relative inexperience, was performing admirably under pressure, handling communications and constantly monitoring systems, while Maxwell focused on flying the aircraft. "Denver Center, SkyWest, 529, Thompson radioed. "We're experiencing severe turbulence at flight level 380. Requesting deviation 30 degrees to the north to avoid cells." As they waited for clearance, the turbulence intensified further. The aircraft rolled slightly to the right, despite Maxwell's corrective inputs, a sign of the powerful forces acting upon it. "Deviation approved. SkyWest 529, the controller responded. Be advised, we're seeing similar conditions reported throughout the area. Maxwell banked the aircraft, turning away from the worst of the weather visible on radar. It wasn't an ideal solution. They would still encounter significant turbulence, but it offered the best available path through the mountainous storm system. In first class, Wilson's panic had become fully manifest. His breathing was now audibly rapid, his face pale, his hands trembling as they gripped the armrests. The passenger next to him, a middle-aged woman who had been quietly reading before the turbulence began, noticed his distress. First time in rough air, she asked sympathetically. Wilson shook his head, unable to articulate that his panic stemmed not just from the turbulence, but from the crushing realization that his life and career now depended entirely on the skill of a man he had publicly demeaned, a man who now held complete power over his fate. It was a reversal so complete, so ironic, that it seemed almost designed to teach a lesson in humility. The anxiety he was experiencing went beyond the normal fear of turbulence. It was existential in nature, forcing him to confront not just his mortality, but his entire self-concept. The carefully constructed identity he had built over decades, the powerful deal-maker, the commanding executive, the man whose will shaped the world around him, was crumbling in the face of his complete dependence on someone he had tried to diminish. As the aircraft continued its struggle through the mountain weather, Maxwell's voice came over the PA system again, steady and reassuring. Ladies and gentlemen, as you've noticed, we're encountering some significant turbulence as we cross the Rockies. This is normal for this region, and the aircraft is designed to handle these conditions safely. We're working with air traffic control to find a smoother route, and we expect conditions to improve within the next 20 minutes as we clear the mountain range. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts securely fastened. The calm professionalism of his voice had a noticeably calming effect on many passengers. There was something deeply reassuring about hearing a captain sound so unperturbed by conditions that seemed so alarming to those experiencing them. It was the voice of someone who had seen worse, who understood precisely what was happening, and who knew exactly how to handle it. For Garrett Wilson, however, Maxwell's voice through the speakers was a reminder of his complete dependence on someone he had wronged, a fact that only intensified his panic. As the aircraft shuddered through another patch of turbulence, Wilson closed his eyes tightly, his knuckles white on the armrests, facing not only the physical discomfort of turbulence, but the much more significant turbulence of his own making. The situation deteriorated rapidly as SkyWest 529 penetrated deeper into the mountain weather system. What had appeared on radar as discrete cells was revealing itself to be a more organized and volatile storm complex. Lightning flashed continuously around the aircraft, illuminating the cockpit in sharp bursts of blinding light. Maxwell and Thompson worked with focused intensity, their communication reduced to essential information as they navigated through one of the most challenging flying environments either had encountered. The cockpit atmosphere had transformed from professional calm to concentrated urgency, not panic, but the heightened awareness that comes with navigating genuine danger. Wind shear, alert! The automated system suddenly announced, its synthesized voice cutting through the cockpit noise. Wind shear ahead. Wind shear, a sudden change in wind direction or speed over a short distance, represented one of aviation's most serious hazards, particularly during takeoff and landing. But even at cruising altitude, severe wind shear could place significant stress on the aircraft structure and potentially exceed the autopilot's ability to maintain control. Maxwell's response was immediate. Going around, he announced, adding power and initiating a climbing turn away from the detected wind shear. Years of simulator training and real-world experience had conditioned this response to the point where it was almost reflexive, a demonstration of how deeply aviation safety protocols were embedded in his professional identity. The maneuver placed additional strain on the already stressed aircraft. In the cabin, the increased engine power was audible, adding to passengers' anxiety as the aircraft banked sharply while continuing to buck in the turbulent air. Denver Center SkyWest 5:29. Thompson radioed, his voice professional despite the tension. Executing wind shear avoidance maneuver. Requesting immediate clearance to heading 340, climb to flight level 400. Sky West, 5:29, clearance approved. Caution, we're getting multiple wind shear reports in your vicinity. As Maxwell executed the maneuver, a new warning illuminated on the engine display. Engine 2 vibration excessive. The earlier issue that had concerned Captain Hoffman had returned with greater severity under the stress of the turbulent conditions. Engine 2 vibration exceeding limits. Thompson reported, his eyes fixed on the warning display. Maxwell assessed the situation with the rapid calculation of an experienced captain. The excessive vibration could indicate several problems, from a relatively minor imbalance to a potentially catastrophic mechanical failure. The prudent course was to reduce stress on the affected engine. Reducing engine 2 to 80%, he announced smoothly, adjusting the throttle. Prepare for engine 2, shutdown procedure if vibration doesn't stabilize. The reduction in power created an asymmetric thrust condition that Maxwell compensated for, automatically, his hands making minute adjustments to maintain their course through the violent turbulence. Every movement was calculated precise, the physical manifestation of thousands of hours of training and experience. In the main cabin, the combined effects of the wind shear avoidance maneuver, the continuing severe turbulence, and the power reduction on one engine created a deeply unsettling experience for the passengers. The aircraft seemed to be fighting against powerful invisible forces, banking, climbing, and shuddering in ways that commercial flights rarely did. Oxygen masks dropped in several rows when the rapid altitude change triggered their deployment system, not because cabin pressure was actually compromised, but because the sensors detected a rate of climb that mimicked a decompression event. This added to the sense of emergency, with passengers fumbling to secure masks while the aircraft continued to move violently through the turbulent air. Alicia's voice came over the PA system, steady despite the chaos. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. The oxygen mask deployment is a precautionary system activation due to our rapid altitude change. Cabin pressure is normal. If a mask has dropped in front of you, please place it over your nose and mouth, although it is not necessary at this time. Her clear factual explanation helped prevent the mask deployment from triggering widespread panic. It was another example of how professional crew members managed not just the technical aspects of flight, but also the human psychology of air travel, providing information that helped passengers contextualize alarming events within the robust safety systems of modern aviation. In first class, Garrett Wilson had reached the limits of his composure. The combination of physical discomfort from the turbulence and the psychological stress of his situation had overwhelmed his usual self-control. His breath came in ragged gasps, his face slick with cold sweat. The passenger next to him, increasingly concerned, called for a flight attendant. "I think he's having a panic attack," she explained when Alicia managed to make her way forward during a brief lull in the turbulence. Alicia knelt beside Wilson's seat, speaking calmly despite the continuing movement of the aircraft. "Sir, try to take slow, deep breaths. We're going to be through this rough air soon." Wilson barely seemed to register her presence, his eyes unfocused, his hands trembling violently. I can't," he repeated, unable to complete the thought. The man who had projected such commanding presence just hours earlier was now reduced to incoherence, a transformation that reflected not just the immediate stress of turbulence but the deeper crisis of identity he was experiencing. The realization that his carefully constructed persona of control and authority was ultimately an illusion when faced with the realities of physics and human dependence was proving more destabilizing than the physical movement of the aircraft. In row 14, Camilla observed the unfolding drama with the perspective of someone who had reported from war zones and natural disasters. The turbulence was frightening, certainly, but it was the human reactions that fascinated her. how stress stripped away social veneers, revealing the raw humanity beneath. She noted Wilson's breakdown with journalistic detachment, seeing it as the natural conclusion of the arc that had begun with his confrontation with Maxwell. The story she was witnessing had evolved beyond a simple account of prejudice and ironic reversal. It now encompassed the psychology of power, the fragility of human control, and the ways in which crisis reveals character. These elements would add depth to her reporting, transforming what might have been a straightforward viral video story into something more profound and universally resonant. In the cockpit, Maxwell and Thompson continued to battle the elements, their focus absolute. The reduced power on Engine 2 had stabilized the vibration, but they were still dealing with severe turbulence, wind shear threats, and the complex task of finding a safe path through the massive storm system. "We need to get north of this entire complex," Maxwell decided, studying the radar. "Request deviation, 60 degrees north, maintain FL 400. Thompson relayed the request to ATC, receiving immediate approval. Controllers were giving wide latitude to aircraft in the area, recognizing the severity of the conditions. The unusual degree of flexibility reflected the extreme nature of the weather system, a situation where the normal constraints of airspace management were temporarily relaxed in the interest of safety. As Maxwell executed the turn, the aircraft was struck by lightning, a brilliant flash and deafening crack that momentarily overwhelmed the senses of everyone on board. Several electrical systems flickered briefly before stabilizing, a testament to the aircraft's robust design and multiple redundancies. "Systems check," Maxwell ordered calmly, initiating a rapid verification of all critical aircraft functions. Thompson responded with equal composure, methodically confirming each system's status. All systems nominal. No damage detected. The lightning strike, while startling, had caused no significant issues. Modern commercial aircraft were designed to withstand such events with specialized lightning protection systems integrated into their structure. The momentary flickering of systems was normal and expected, representing automatic reset procedures rather than actual damage. However, the lightning strike heightened the already considerable anxiety in the cabin. Several passengers screamed when it struck, and prayers became audible from multiple rows. The cumulative stress of the departure drama, the ongoing turbulence, and now the lightning strike was testing the emotional resilience of even the most experienced travelers. Wilson, in the midst of his panic attack, seemed to reach a breaking point. "Please," he gasped to Alicia, who was still attempting to calm him. "Tell him I'm sorry. Tell the captain I'm sorry." The plea was revealing in its rawness a complete abandonment of the pride and status consciousness that had defined his earlier behavior. In this moment of perceived mortal danger, Wilson's priorities had clarified dramatically. The business deal, his professional reputation, the social hierarchy he had tried to enforce, all had fallen away, leaving only the fundamental human desire for reconciliation in the face of mortality. Alicia's expression softened slightly. "Try to relax, sir. We're going to be fine. Captain Reynolds knows exactly what he's doing." Her reassurance addressed the implicit fear beneath Wilson's apology, the worry that Maxwell might consciously or unconsciously be less committed to his safety given their earlier confrontation. It was an unfounded fear given Maxwell's professionalism, but understandable in the context of Wilson's distressed state and his own projection of how he might behave in a reversed situation. In the cockpit, Maxwell was indeed demonstrating precisely why he had risen to become one of SkyWest's most respected captains. His handling of the aircraft remained smooth despite the conditions, his decision-making clear and decisive, his communication with Thompson and ATC concise and professional. Gradually, their deviation north began to yield results. The turbulence, while still significant, became less severe. The lightning flashes grew more distant. The radar showed clearer air ahead as they skirted the northern edge of the storm complex. "I think we're starting to get above it," Thompson observed with cautious optimism. Maxwell nodded, though his vigilance didn't waver. Let's maintain this heading for another 50 miles before turning back on course. I want to be well clear of this system." As the worst of the turbulence finally began to subside, Maxwell keyed the PA system again. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reynolds. We're beginning to clear the worst of the mountain weather and should be experiencing smoother conditions shortly. I appreciate your patience during this difficult passage. The seatbelt sign will remain on until I'm confident we've fully cleared the turbulence. Flight attendants will check the cabin for any issues that may have arisen during the rough air." His voice remained as steady and professional as it had been during the initial departure announcement, no hint of the considerable stress he had been under while navigating one of the most challenging weather systems of his career. It was this consistency, this unflappable composure regardless of circumstances, that defined Maxwell Reynolds both as a pilot and as a person. In first class, Garrett Wilson had begun to recover from his panic attack as the turbulence subsided. His breathing was steadier, though he remained pale and visibly shaken. The experience had stripped away every vestige of his earlier arrogance, leaving behind a man humbled by forces both natural and social beyond his control. As the aircraft continued westward now in noticeably smoother air, passengers began to relax. Conversations resumed nervous laughter, replaced anxious silence, and a collective sense of having survived something significant together permeated the cabin. In the cockpit, Maxwell and Thompson continued monitoring the weather ahead, vigilant for any new challenges that might emerge. But both recognized they had navigated through the worst of it, a testament to their skills, their training, and the remarkable engineering of the aircraft they commanded. "Nice flying," Captain Thompson said quietly as they adjusted their course back toward San Francisco. "That was intense." Maxwell allowed himself a small smile, the first since taking command. "We did good work together, First Officer. That's what this job is all about. Working as a team, staying calm, making good decisions under pressure." As SkyWest 529 continued its journey westward now in calmer skies, the mood throughout the aircraft was transforming. The shared experience of turbulence had created a strange intimacy among the passengers, a reminder of their common humanity in the face of natural forces that made no distinction between first class and economy, between powerful and powerless, between those who judged and those who were judged. Part 5. Internal Transformation. The cabin of SkyWest 529 had transformed. The shared experience of severe turbulence had erased the invisible barriers that typically separate strangers on aircraft. Passengers who had not exchanged a word before the Rocky Mountain crossing were now engaged in animated conversations, sharing their impressions of the harrowing experience they had just survived together. "I've been flying weekly for 15 years and never experienced anything like that," a middle-aged businessman commented to his seatmate. "I thought those oxygen masks were just for show in the safety demonstrations," another passenger responded. "Never expected to actually see them drop." The communal nature of the experience had temporarily suspended the usual social divisions of air travel. Business travelers in pressed suits chatted easily with families in vacation attire. Elderly passengers received solicitous attention from younger ones. The artificial hierarchy of boarding groups and cabin classes had been momentarily replaced by the more fundamental human connection of shared vulnerability and survival. As the aircraft continued westward in significantly calmer air, Alicia and the other flight attendants moved through the cabin, checking on passengers and resuming beverage service. The shared ordeal had created a noticeable shift in passengers' attitudes. They were more patient, more appreciative of the crew's efforts, more aware of their fundamental vulnerability as humans hurtling through the sky in a metal tube. In first class, Garrett Wilson sat silently staring out the window at the landscape passing below. The panic attack had left him physically drained, but the emotional impact ran much deeper. For perhaps the first time in decades, Wilson was engaged in genuine self-reflection. His mind replayed the morning's events with painful clarity. His aggressive behavior toward Maxwell, the contemptuous, Get off this plane, command the shocking revelation of Maxwell's true role, and finally the terrifying turbulence that had reduced him to pleading for forgiveness. The cosmic irony was impossible to ignore. He had attempted to assert dominance over a man who turned out to be not just his equal, but his superior in the most literal sense, the person responsible for his safety, the ultimate authority in the aircraft. The universe had delivered a lesson in humility with almost literary precision. Wilson thought back to earlier moments in his career, times when he had dismissed subordinates' concerns, when he had judged colleagues based on appearances rather than abilities, when he had wielded his power with casual cruelty. Had he always been this person? Or had success gradually corroded his character? One compromise at a time. His professional ascent at Pinnacle Capital had been marked by a series of victories achieved through aggressive tactics and ruthless efficiency. Each success had reinforced his belief that power was its own justification, that results trumped methods, that winning was the only metric that mattered. Over time, this philosophy had extended beyond his professional approach to color, his personal interactions, creating the man who would demand another human being get off this plane simply for occupying space he wanted. Now, as he watched the varied terrain of Nevada passing beneath the aircraft's wing, Wilson confronted an uncomfortable question. What was the true cost of the success he had achieved? The financial rewards were substantial. Certainly, the house in Greenwich, the apartment in Manhattan, the vacation properties, the private school tuitions for children he rarely saw. But what had been sacrificed along the way? Relationships, certainly. Basic human decency, evidently. And most troubling, perhaps, his very humanity, his capacity to see others as people rather than obstacles or instruments. His phone buzzed with a message from the Nakamura team. Meeting still confirmed for 3 p.m. Their CEO specifically requesting your presence. Status update. Wilson stared at the message without responding. The Nakamura deal, the billion-dollar merger that had seemed so all-consuming this morning, now felt strangely distant, as if it belonged to another person's life. The intense turbulence had stripped away the layers of pretense, forcing him to confront more fundamental truths about himself and his place in the world. In row 14, Camila Rodriguez observed the transformation taking place throughout the cabin with a journalist's trained eye. She had covered enough crisis situations to recognize the pattern, the initial shock and fear, the bonding that occurred during shared danger, and now the reflective aftermath where people reassessed their priorities and perspectives. Her article was taking shape in her mind, not just a straightforward account of Wilson's behavior and its ironic consequences, but a deeper exploration of how crisis reveals character, how power dynamics shift in unexpected ways, and how moments of forced humility might lead to genuine change. She watched as Alicia passed by Wilson's seat, offering him water, which he accepted with a quiet, "Thank you." Two simple words that would have seemed inconceivable from the man who had boarded the aircraft just hours earlier. The transformation in Wilson was striking not just for its completeness, but for its apparent authenticity. This wasn't the calculated contrition of a corporate apology or the strategic humility of someone seeking to minimize consequences. It was the genuine recalibration of a person confronting fundamental truths about himself, the kind of experience that, whether temporary or lasting, revealed the reality beneath the carefully constructed persona. In the cockpit, Maxwell and First Officer Thompson had settled into a comfortable rhythm now that the worst of the weather was behind them. The engine 2 vibration had stabilized at acceptable levels after the power reduction, and they had begun planning their approach into San Francisco. Weather at SFO showing clear conditions, Thompson reported. Winds 280 at 12 knots. We should be able to make a straight-in approach to runway 28R. Maxwell nodded, already thinking through the descent profile. Let's plan for a conservative approach given the engine 2 situation. I'll keep it at reduced power through landing. His decision-making remained methodical and safety-focused even as the immediate crisis had passed. It was this consistent professionalism, regardless of circumstances, that had defined his career and earned him the respect of colleagues throughout the airline. While Maxwell didn't know about Wilson's panic attack or subsequent apology, he had already demonstrated the quality that made such knowledge unnecessary, the ability to separate personal feelings from professional responsibility. Whatever Wilson had said or done earlier, Maxwell's commitment to the safety of every person aboard, Wilson included, had never wavered. It wasn't a conscious choice, but an intrinsic aspect of his character, a direct expression of his understanding of what it meant to be a captain. Back in the cabin, the flight had begun to regain a semblance of normality. Passengers adjusted to the smoother air, some attempting to nap, others working on laptops or watching movies on seatback screens. But beneath this routine veneer, something had fundamentally changed. The experience of severe turbulence had reminded everyone aboard of their mortality, their vulnerability, and the thin margins that separate comfort from catastrophe. For Garrett Wilson, this realization was particularly profound. The man who had boarded the aircraft, believing himself entitled to control every aspect of his environment, had been forced to confront the limits of his power in the most visceral way possible. As SkyWest 529 continued westward through now peaceful skies, Wilson found himself facing questions he had avoided for decades. Questions about character, about privilege, about the person he had become, and the legacy he would leave behind. Though the aircraft had cleared the worst of the Rocky Mountain turbulence, the journey was far from over. Captain Maxwell Reynolds remained vigilant in the cockpit, monitoring the reduced power on Engine 2 and scanning the weather radar for any new challenges that might emerge as they crossed the Sierra Nevada mountains before descending into San Francisco. "Let's get a latest ATIS for San Francisco," Maxwell instructed Thompson, referring to the automatic terminal information service that provided current airport conditions. Thompson tuned to the appropriate frequency, jotting down the information as it played through his headset. San Francisco information, Quebec time. 12:15 Zulu wind. 290 at 15 knots visibility. 10 miles ceiling. 8,000 scattered temperature. 62 dew point. 56 altimeter 29.92. ILS approaches in use runways 28L and 28R. Advise on initial contact you have information. Quebec. Maxwell processed the information quickly. Good conditions for arrival. We'll request the visual approach to 28R. The routine exchange demonstrated how aviation operated through precise, standardized communications, a system where information was conveyed efficiently and without ambiguity. It was a stark contrast to the emotional status-driven interaction that had characterized Wilson's earlier confrontation with Maxwell. In the cockpit, clarity and accuracy took precedence over assertion and dominance, a different model of human interaction based on shared purpose rather than individual ego. In the main cabin, the atmosphere had settled into a strange mixture of relief and anticipation. The worst was behind them, but the memory of the severe turbulence remained fresh. Passengers who had been strangers hours earlier now shared a bond forged in shared adversity. Alicia moved through the cabin with renewed efficiency. The turbulence had disrupted the normal service routine, but she was determined to ensure passengers' needs were met before their arrival in San Francisco. When she reached first class, she found Garrett Wilson much calmer than during his panic attack, though still subdued. "Can I get you anything, sir?" she asked professionally. Wilson looked up at her, his expression markedly different from the entitled anger he had displayed earlier. "Just water, please," he said quietly. Then after a pause, "And thank you for earlier, when I was not at my best." Alicia nodded, surprised by this glimpse of humanity from the man who had been so abrasive before. "It happens to many people during severe turbulence," she replied diplomatically. "Even frequent flyers." Her response was gracious, acknowledging his apology without dismissing the earlier behavior or suggesting that panic excused it. It was the professional kindness of someone who recognized human fallibility without condoning its excesses. As she moved away, Wilson returned to his thoughts. The Nakamura deal still loomed, the meeting that would either cement his legacy or mark the beginning of his professional decline. His phone showed multiple messages from his team growing increasingly urgent as the 3 p.m. deadline approached. But Wilson found his priorities shifting in subtle yet profound ways. The confrontation with Maxwell, followed by the terrifying turbulence and his humiliating panic attack, had forced a perspective he had avoided for decades. What did it profit a man to secure a billion-dollar deal if in the process he revealed himself to be morally bankrupt? He had built his career on the assumption that success justified any means necessary to achieve it, that winning the game was the only metric that mattered. Now, having experienced complete powerlessness and dependence on others, he was reconsidering that foundational belief. Perhaps there were aspects of success beyond the financial and professional dimensions related to character, to basic human decency, to the capacity for respect and humility. In row 14, Camilla continued developing her article, now incorporating not just the initial confrontation and its ironic reversal, but also the transformative effect of the shared crisis. She had observed Wilson's behavior throughout the flight, noting the gradual shift from arrogance to reflection. As a journalist focused on social justice issues, she was particularly interested in whether moments of forced humility could lead to genuine change, or if they merely produced temporary adjustments in behavior without addressing underlying attitudes. Her article would explore this question without offering simplistic answers. Real transformation was rarely immediate or complete. The Wilson who emerged from this flight would likely carry elements of both his former entitlement and his newfound humility, his future behavior shaped by which aspect he chose to nurture in the days and weeks ahead. In the cockpit, Maxwell and Thompson continued their professional partnership, now planning the details of their approach into San Francisco. Despite the calm conditions, Maxwell maintained his vigilance. The earlier engine vibration issue still concerned him, though it remained stable at the reduced power setting. "Let's review the single-engine approach procedure," Maxwell instructed Thompson, just as a precaution. Thompson nodded, appreciating Maxwell's thoroughness. They spent the next few minutes reviewing the steps they would take if Engine 2 required shutdown during the critical approach and landing phase. It was unlikely to be necessary, but Maxwell believed in preparation for all contingencies, a philosophy that had served him well throughout his career. San Francisco approach, SkyWest 529, descending through flight, level 240 information Quebec. Thompson radioed as they began their descent toward the Bay Area. SkyWest 529 San Francisco approach radar contact came the response. Descend and maintain 15,000 feet. Expect visual approach runway 28R. As they continued their descent, Maxwell made another cabin announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reynolds. We've begun our initial descent into the San Francisco area. We should be on the ground in approximately 35 minutes. The weather in San Francisco is excellent clear skies, temperature 62 degrees. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for arrival." His voice remained as steady and professional as it had been throughout the flight from the initial boarding confrontation to the harrowing turbulence over the Rockies. That consistency, that unflappable composure regardless of circumstances, was the hallmark of Maxwell's character, both in the cockpit and beyond. In first class, Wilson checked his watch again. If they landed on schedule, he would still have time to make the Nakamura meeting. But somehow the outcome of that meeting no longer seemed as all-consuming as it had that morning. Something more fundamental had shifted within him, a recognition of his own fallibility, of the consequences of arrogance, of the thin veneer that separated his carefully constructed professional persona from the frightened, vulnerable human beneath. The realization wasn't comfortable, but it was clarifying. Whatever happened with the Nakamura deal's success or failure, he would need to reconsider how he conducted himself professionally and personally. The man who had boarded Flight 529 in Chicago believed his status and wealth entitled him to whatever he wanted. The man approaching San Francisco understood that such entitlement was both illusory and corrosive. As SkyWest 529 continued its descent toward San Francisco International Airport, each passenger prepared for landing in their own way. Some gathered belongings, others completed work tasks. Many simply gazed out at the spectacular views of the Bay Area emerging below. But for Garrett Wilson and Captain Maxwell Reynolds, this was more than just another flight's end. It was the conclusion of a journey that had forced both men to confront aspects of themselves and each other that would have otherwise remained hidden. The aircraft passed through 10,000 feet, the point of no return for landing preparation. Cabin crew secured galleys, passengers stowed tray tables, and the unmistakable sense of an imminent arrival permeated the cabin. Outside, the California coast gleamed in the afternoon sun, a stark contrast to the violent storms they had navigated just hours before. As SkyWest 529 began its final approach into San Francisco, events beyond the aircraft were unfolding with extraordinary speed. The video Camila Rodriguez had captured of Garrett Wilson's confrontation with Maxwell Reynolds had taken on a life of its own in the digital ecosystem. Unbeknownst to the passengers aboard SkyWest 529, Camila had managed to upload a 90-second clip during a brief window of connectivity before they entered the severe turbulence. She had edited it carefully, capturing Wilson's "Get off this plane" command, Maxwell's dignified response, and the stunning moment when Maxwell was called forward to assume command of the aircraft. Her caption was simple but powerful. Man tells passenger to "get off this plane." Minutes later discovers he's the captain who will fly it. At "get off this plane," Shush SkyWest. The pilot wore a Hawaiian shirt. The upload had been a professional decision rather than a vindictive one. As a journalist covering the intersection of social media and accountability, Camila recognized the educational value of the incident, its ability to illuminate broader patterns of prejudice and assumption in a concrete, undeniable way. The video wasn't just about exposing one man's behavior, but about demonstrating how bias operates in everyday interactions, how appearance often trumps ability in initial assessments, and how those assessments can be dramatically wrong. By the time SkyWest 529 was crossing the Sierra Nevada mountains, the video had already accumulated over 2 million views. Social media users shared it with comments ranging from outrage at Wilson's behavior to admiration for Maxwell's professionalism. Hashtags like #GetOffThisPlane and #The pilot wore a Hawaiian shirt were trending nationally. The video had struck a chord for several reasons. First, it contained a perfect narrative arc conflict revelation, reversal packaged in a format brief enough for digital consumption. Second, it illustrated a form of justice that rarely occurs in real time, the immediate consequence of prejudiced behavior. And third, it featured a protagonist in Maxwell who embodied dignity under pressure, a quality that resonated across political and social divides. News organizations had picked up the story, embedding the video in articles with headlines like "Investment Director's Racist Confrontation," "Backfires Spectacularly," and "The pilot he told to get off this plane ended up flying it through severe turbulence." Aviation blogs and forums were particularly engaged with professional pilots and aviation enthusiasts discussing both the social dynamics of the incident and the technical challenges Maxwell had faced navigating the Rocky Mountain storm system. The story had particular resonance in aviation communities, where the professionalism and focus exemplified by Maxwell represented core industry values. As the video spread, internet sleuths quickly identified both men. Wilson's position at Pinnacle Capital became public knowledge, along with details about the pending Nakamura merger. Maxwell's distinguished career at SkyWest was outlined in appreciative posts, with former colleagues and trainees sharing stories about his professionalism and mentorship. One former first officer who had flown with Maxwell posted, "Captain Reynolds is the real deal, the kind of pilot who makes everyone around him better." Not surprised, he handled this situation with total class. He treated me with the same respect on my first day as a rookie FO as he did on our last flight together. Pinnacle Capital's social media accounts were flooded with comments about Wilson's behavior, forcing the company's public relations team into emergency response mode. The company's stock price had dipped slightly as investors worried about potential reputational damage and the status of the Nakamura deal. None of this online firestorm was visible to those aboard SkyWest 529 as they prepared for landing in San Francisco. Wilson, unaware of his new internet infamy, was focused on the upcoming Nakamura meeting, though with a significantly different mindset than he'd had that morning in Chicago. His phone buzzed with another message from his team: urgent update. Video of incident on your flight going viral. PR team requesting immediate statement. Nakamura team aware of situation. Meeting still on, but atmosphere changed. Wilson stared at the message in disbelief. The confrontation had been recorded. It was public. His mind raced through the implications: professional, personal, reputational. The carefully constructed image he had maintained throughout his career was crumbling in real time, exposed by 90 seconds of unguarded behavior captured at his worst moment. The realization added another layer to his already profound discomfort. Not only had he experienced the private humiliation of his panic attack and the personal revelation about his character, but now those events would be contextualized by public exposure of his behavior. The incident would not remain confined to the aircraft, but would follow him into boardrooms, client meetings, and social gatherings, a digital shadow that could potentially redefine his professional identity. In row 14, Camila was also receiving updates, though, of a different nature. Her editor had messaged video at 3.5 M views and climbing. Full article ready for publication as soon as you land. Need quotes from Reynolds if possible. This is going to be huge. The growing online reaction transformed what had been a personal confrontation into something much larger, a symbolic moment that resonated with millions who had experienced or witnessed similar behaviors. It was no longer just about Wilson and Maxwell. It had become a cultural touchpoint, a perfect encapsulation of privilege confronted by quiet competence. In the cockpit, Maxwell and Thompson were entirely focused on the approach into San Francisco, unaware of their sudden internet fame. They configured the aircraft for landing, extending flaps, and slowing to approach speed, Maxwell's hands steady on the controls despite the reduced power on Engine 2. SkyWest 529 cleared for visual approach, runway 28R, came the controller's instruction. Wind 280 at 12 knots. Cleared for visual approach, 28R. SkyWest 529. Thompson acknowledged. Maxwell guided the aircraft smoothly onto the final approach course. The San Francisco Bay, glittering below the iconic Golden Gate Bridge, visible in the distance. Despite the earlier challenges, his landing would be textbook perfect, a final demonstration of the skill and professionalism that defined his career. As SkyWest 529 descended through 1,000 feet on final approach, Garrett Wilson braced himself for landing, but also for what awaited him beyond the aircraft. The Nakamura meeting, once his sole focus, now competed with the unexpected public exposure of his behavior. The video was out there, spreading exponentially, shaping perceptions of him that would endure long after the Nakamura deal was forgotten. In that moment, as the aircraft's wheels prepared to touch California soil, Wilson realized that regardless of the meeting's outcome, something fundamental had changed, not just in how others would view him, but in how he viewed himself. The journey had forced a confrontation not just with Maxwell Reynolds, but with his own character, his own choices, the person he had allowed himself to become. The wheels of SkyWest 529 touched down smoothly on runway 28R, another perfect landing to conclude an extraordinary flight. As the thrust reversers deployed and the aircraft began to slow, Maxwell's voice came over the PA system one final time. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to San Francisco. Local time is 1:32 p.m. with clear skies and pleasant temperatures. please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until we reach the gate and the seatbelt sign is turned off. On behalf of First Officer Thompson, our flight attendants, Alicia, Jennifer, and Michael, and the entire SkyWest team. It has been our pleasure serving you today. We appreciate your patience during our challenging journey, and we wish you a pleasant stay in the Bay Area or a smooth connection to your final destination. His voice remained the same steady, professional baritone that had guided them through turbulence and calm, alike the voice of someone for whom excellence was not an aspiration but a standard, regardless of circumstances. As SkyWest 529 taxied toward the terminal, the passengers of the morning's flight from Chicago had no way of knowing that their journey had already become something more than a simple transportation event. It had transformed into a story that was spreading across the digital landscape, a modern parable about prejudice, competence, and the subtle ways justice sometimes manifests in the world. Part 6. Landing and Consequences. As SkyWest 529 began its final descent into San Francisco International Airport, Captain Maxwell Reynolds remained focused entirely on the task at hand. Despite the earlier engine vibration issues and the challenging journey across the Rockies, his demeanor in the cockpit was one of calm professionalism. This final phase of flight demanded complete concentration regardless of the unusual circumstances that had placed him in command. Flaps 15. Maxwell instructed as they configured the aircraft for landing. First Officer Thompson responded promptly, extending the wing flaps to the specified position. Speed checks, flaps 15. Thompson confirmed, verifying that their airspeed was appropriate for the configuration. The approach into San Francisco was visually spectacular. The expansive bay to the east, the city's distinctive skyline to the north, the Pacific Ocean stretching to the western horizon. But neither pilot was focused on the view. Their attention was directed entirely to the instruments, the aircraft's behavior, and the runway alignment. Maxwell guided the aircraft smoothly onto the final approach course for runway 28R. The San Francisco Bay stretched out below them, glittering in the early afternoon sun. The iconic Golden Gate Bridge was visible in the distance, a postcard-perfect view that contrasted sharply with the turbulent weather they had navigated earlier. SkyWest 529 continue approach, runway 28R winds. 270 at 10 knots, the tower controller instructed. Continue approach 28R, SkyWest 529. Thompson acknowledged. In the main cabin, flight attendants moved efficiently through their landing preparation. Cabin crew prepare for landing, Alicia announced over the PA system. She performed a final walkthrough, verifying that tray tables where stowed seatbelts were fastened and carry-on items were secured. As she passed through first class, she noted that Garrett Wilson was sitting perfectly still, staring straight ahead. The transformation in his demeanor since the morning's confrontation was striking. The aggressive entitlement had been replaced by a subdued introspection. Whether this represented genuine change or merely the temporary effect of humiliation remained to be seen, but the contrast was undeniable. Wilson was processing multiple layers of crisis simultaneously. The most immediate was the approaching Nakamura meeting, a professional culmination now complicated by his behavior aboard the flight. Beyond that loomed the emerging public relations disaster with the viral video threatening both his professional reputation and his company's standing. But beneath these external concerns lay a more fundamental crisis, an identity crisis triggered by his complete loss of control during the turbulence and the subsequent revelation about his character that the experience had forced upon him. Further back in row 14, Camila Rodriguez was preparing her equipment for landing while mentally organizing the article she planned to write. The story had developed far beyond her initial documentation of casual prejudice. It had become a perfect encapsulation of assumption, judgment, competence, and consequence. A real-time parable about how quickly power dynamics can shift when underlying realities are revealed. Throughout the cabin, passengers experienced the familiar sensations of approach, the gradual descent, the subtle shifts in engine sound, the slight banking as the aircraft aligned with the runway. Many were looking forward to the relief of landing after the unusually stressful flight. Some had connections to make, others had meetings to attend, but all shared the universal traveler's anticipation of reaching solid ground. In the cockpit, Maxwell and Thompson continued the landing checklist with practiced efficiency. "Landing gear down," Maxwell instructed. Thompson moved the landing gear lever to the down position, waiting for the confirmation indicators. "3 green landing gear down and locked," he reported. "Final approach. Checklist complete." Maxwell confirmed, his hands steady on the controls as he guided the aircraft through the last 2,000 feet of altitude. The San Francisco coastline grew larger in the windscreen. Maxwell made minute adjustments to their approach path, compensating for the slight crosswind. Engine 2, still at reduced power due to the earlier vibration issues, was behaving normally now, though Maxwell remained vigilant for any changes. SkyWest 529 cleared to land. Runway 28R came the final clearance from the tower. Cleared to land, 28R, SkyWest 529. Thompson acknowledged. Maxwell focused intently on maintaining the proper glide path. Landing was always the most critical phase of flight, demanding precision and perfect timing. Despite having performed thousands of landings throughout his career, he approached each one with the same focused respect for the physics and responsibilities involved. 1,000. Thompson called out, reading from the radar altimeter as they descended through 1,000 feet above the ground. Stable continuing. Maxwell responded, confirming that all parameters, airspeed, descent rate, aircraft configuration were appropriate for landing. In first class, Garrett Wilson found himself holding his breath as the ground approached. The landing would mark not just the end of this extraordinary flight, but the beginning of whatever consequences awaited him. His phone, now in airplane mode, contained dozens of notifications he had only glimpsed before boarding, indications that the confrontation had been recorded and had begun spreading online. As SkyWest 529 descended through 500 feet, Maxwell made his final adjustments. The runway threshold passed beneath them, the distinctive piano key markings blurring as the aircraft glided just above the concrete surface. With perfect timing, Maxwell executed the landing flare, the slight pitch-up maneuver that transitions an aircraft from descent to the gentle touchdown. The main landing gear contacted the runway with barely a bump, a testament to Maxwell's skill even with one engine at reduced power. The nose gear settled a moment later, and Maxwell applied reverse thrust to slow the aircraft. "Nice landing," Captain Thompson commented as they decelerated along the runway. Maxwell nodded in acknowledgement, but remained focused on completing the rollout safely. Only when they had slowed to taxi speed and turned off the active runway did he allow himself the smallest smile of satisfaction, not just for the landing, but for the entire journey from unexpected passenger to captain, navigating both technical challenges and the unusual human dynamics involved. SkyWest 529 contact ground control 121.8. "Good day," the tower controller instructed. Thompson made the frequency change while Maxwell guided the aircraft along the designated taxiway toward their assigned gate. The familiar landscape of SFO surrounded them: terminals, hangars, ground equipment, other aircraft arriving and departing. After the extraordinary events of the past few hours, the routine nature of this final phase of flight seemed almost surreal. For the passengers of SkyWest 529, the gentle touchdown and smooth deceleration brought waves of relief. The journey that had begun with a confrontation in Chicago, that had navigated severe turbulence over the Rockies, that had forced unexpected self-reflection from both antagonist and protagonist, was approaching its conclusion. Maxwell made the standard arrival announcement, his voice as steady and professional as it had been throughout the flight. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to San Francisco. Local time is 1:32 p.m. with clear skies and pleasant temperatures. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until we reach the gate and the seatbelt sign is turned off. On behalf of First Officer Thompson, our flight attendants, Alicia, Jennifer, and Michael, and the entire SkyWest team, it has been our pleasure serving you today. The aircraft continued its taxi toward the terminal, where waiting friends, family members, and business associates were unaware of the extraordinary journey, both literal and metaphorical, that the passengers of SkyWest 529 had experienced. For Maxwell Reynolds and Garrett Wilson, however, the true impact of the day's events was just beginning to unfold. The wheels of SkyWest Flight 529 touched down on runway 28R at San Francisco International Airport with barely a whisper, a textbook greaser landing that professional pilots strive to achieve. Despite the reduced power on Engine 2, despite the stress of the journey through severe turbulence, despite the unusual circumstances that had placed him in command, Captain Maxwell Reynolds executed the landing with the same precision that had defined his 17-year career. In the cockpit, First Officer Thompson couldn't help but express his admiration. "That was perfect, Captain. Passengers probably didn't even realize we touched down." Maxwell allowed himself a brief nod of acknowledgement as he applied reverse thrust and began the rollout. "Thanks. Let's get them to the gate safely, and this unusual trip will be complete." The deceleration was smooth and controlled, the aircraft slowing steadily until Maxwell guided it off the active runway and onto the designated taxiway. Only then did the tension in his shoulders begin to ease slightly. The most critical phases of flight were behind them: the turbulent crossing of the Rockies, the management of the engine vibration issue, and now the landing at SFO. In the cabin, passengers reacted to the perfect landing with spontaneous applause, a sound that has become less common in modern air travel, but emerges in situations where passengers feel a particular appreciation for their flight crew. The applause rippled through the aircraft, starting near the front and spreading backward, a collective expression of relief and gratitude after a journey marked by unusual stress. Alicia Morales smiled as she moved through the cabin, preparing for arrival at the gate. The applause wasn't just for the smooth landing. It was for the entire story that had unfolded aboard this flight. A story of prejudice confronted by quiet competence, of chaos tamed by professionalism. For many passengers, the applause represented more than appreciation for technical skill. It was an acknowledgement of the human story they had witnessed, a public recognition of Maxwell's dignity in the face of Wilson's disrespect, a collective validation that countered the earlier attempt at humiliation. Without explicit discussion, the cabin community had rendered its judgment on the morning's confrontation. In first class, Garrett Wilson sat motionless as those around him clapped. His hands remained in his lap, his gaze fixed straight ahead. The applause seemed to underscore his humiliation, each clap a reminder of the dramatic reversal he had experienced. He was now faced with multiple challenges requiring immediate attention. His phone continued to vibrate with incoming messages, his team in San Francisco updating him on the Nakamura meeting, his PR department, alerting him to the growing viral spread of the video, his company's board members demanding explanations. Beyond these professional crises loomed a more personal reckoning, the recognition that the incident had exposed aspects of his character that could no longer be denied or disguised. As the aircraft taxied toward Terminal 3, Maxwell made the standard arrival announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to San Francisco. Local time is 1:32 p.m. with clear skies and pleasant temperatures. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until we reach the gate and the seatbelt sign is turned off." His voice remained the same steady professional baritone that had guided them through turbulence and calm. Alike the voice of someone for whom excellence was not an aspiration, but a standard, regardless of circumstances or personal feelings. On behalf of First Officer Thompson, our flight attendants Alicia, Jennifer, and Michael, and the entire SkyWest team, it has been our pleasure serving you today. We appreciate your patience during our challenging journey, and we wish you a pleasant stay in the Bay Area or a smooth connection to your final destination. No mention of the confrontation, no hint of the personal dynamics that had made this flight extraordinary. Maxwell's announcement was the epitome of professional focus centered entirely on the passenger's experience rather than his own vindication. As SkyWest 529 approached Gate 65, ground crews positioned themselves to guide the aircraft into its final parking position. The jet bridge operator prepared to connect the movable walkway to the aircraft door. Baggage handlers gathered ready to unload the checked luggage for transfer to the terminal. Inside the terminal, people waited for arriving passengers, family members, friends, business associates, rideshare drivers holding signs with names. Most were unaware of the drama that had unfolded aboard the incoming flight, though a few had already seen the viral video that was spreading rapidly across social media platforms. In row 14, Camila Rodriguez gathered her belongings, preparing for deplaning. Her documentation of the confrontation between Wilson and Maxwell had already generated significant attention online, but the full article she planned to write would provide context and depth beyond the brief video clip. As a journalist focused on social justice issues, she recognized that this story contained elements that resonated far beyond a single incident on a single flight. The narrative had universal qualities that explained its rapid spread. The satisfaction of seeing unwarranted arrogance humbled the validation of merit over appearance, the rare instance of immediate consequence for prejudiced behavior. These elements combined to create a story that functioned almost like a modern fable, a moral lesson packaged in a compelling real-world event. Maxwell guided the aircraft to its final stopping position with characteristic precision. The parking brake engaged and the engines spooled down to silence. The journey, at least its physical dimension, was complete. Parking checklist, Maxwell announced, and he and Thompson moved through the final items with practiced efficiency. Only when all post-flight procedures were complete did Maxwell allow himself to acknowledge the unusual nature of this particular flight. "Thank you for your excellent support, First Officer," he said to Thompson, extending his hand. "Not exactly a routine trip." Thompson shook his hand firmly. "It was an honor flying with you, Captain. The way you handled everything from the confrontation to the turbulence to the engine issue, well, it was a master class in professionalism." Maxwell accepted the praise with characteristic humility. "We all have our moments to rise to the occasion. Today was just my turn." He began gathering his belongings, including the Hawaiian shirt he had changed out of hours earlier. "I should probably speak with the gate agent about the unusual circumstances of my assuming command. There will be paperwork to complete." As the cabin door opened and passengers began the familiar ritual of standing collecting belongings and filing slowly toward the exit, a sense of shared experience permeated the aircraft. Strangers exchanged glances of mutual understanding, nodding to each other in acknowledgement of what they had witnessed and endured together. Alicia stood near the forward door, thanking passengers as they deplaned. When Maxwell emerged from the cockpit in his full captain's uniform, she gave him a warm smile. "Thank you, Captain Reynolds, for everything today." Maxwell nodded in acknowledgement, understanding that her gratitude encompassed far more than just his piloting skills. He positioned himself near the exit, following the tradition of captains thanking passengers as they depart. As passengers filed past, many expressed personal appreciation beyond the usual cursory thanks. "Amazing job getting us through that storm, Captain. Thank you for your professionalism today. Best handling of turbulence I've ever experienced." Maxwell accepted each comment with gracious humility, deflecting praise rather than absorbing it. His focus remained on ensuring each passenger felt acknowledged as they deplaned, regardless of where they had been seated or what they might have witnessed during the confrontation. The moment everyone in the cabin had been subtly anticipating finally arrived as Garrett Wilson approached the exit. For the first time since the revelation of Maxwell's identity, the two men would come face to face this time with their respective roles fully established and understood. Wilson hesitated briefly as he reached the doorway. The physical space was confined, forcing a proximity that magnified the awkwardness of the moment. He looked at Maxwell, meeting his eyes directly for the first time since the confrontation. "Captain." Wilson began, his voice lower than it had been during his earlier outburst. He seemed to struggle with what to say next, the usual corporate vocabulary of non-apology insufficient for the situation. Maxwell's expression remained professional, neither inviting nor rejecting whatever might follow. He simply waited, affording Wilson the dignity of finding his own words for this moment. "I was wrong." Wilson finally said the three words clearly difficult for a man unaccustomed to admitting error. "About you. About many things." Maxwell nodded once, acknowledging the statement without embellishment. "Safe travels, Mr. Wilson," he replied simply. The exchange was brief but profound. No dramatic reconciliation, no cinematic moment of forgiveness or redemption, just the acknowledgement of truth between two men whose paths had crossed in a way neither could have anticipated when the day began. Wilson continued past, disappearing into the jet bridge, heading toward whatever consequences awaited him beyond the airport. Maxwell remained at his post until the last passenger had deplaned, maintaining the same professional demeanor that had carried him through this extraordinary day. As SkyWest 529 emptied of passengers, the aircraft sat quietly at the gate, just another A321 that would soon be cleaned, restocked, and prepared for its next journey. But for those who had traveled aboard it that day from Chicago to San Francisco, through literal and metaphorical turbulence, it had been a vessel for something far more significant than mere transportation, a journey of revelation, reflection, and perhaps even transformation. This incredible story shows how quickly life can change in unexpected ways. It reminds us that competence speaks louder than appearance, and that true character reveals itself in moments of crisis. Captain Maxwell Reynolds demonstrated extraordinary professionalism in the face of prejudice and technical challenges, embodying the highest standards of aviation excellence. If you enjoyed this video, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share it with others who might appreciate this powerful story of dignity, competence, and the perfect cosmic justice that sometimes unfolds in real life. Your support helps us bring more inspiring, true stories like this one to light. Remember, you never know who might be sitting next to you on your next flight. It could be the very person responsible for your safety.
Точно так и переводится. Бля, брат, в этом помещении вообще другого цвета, они как будто коричневые. Сказал король. Как будто он под твой костюм сделали, смотри, цвет Брунелло это называется? Брунелло Кучинелли. Извиняюсь. Помощь телефона, Саня, Сотик звонит, Саня, Сотик. Свинья, уебище. Ого, а вот что? За что, вот? Это не, это я, бля... Ты чё меня подставил? У тебя, бля, под... чате... Вот с такого цвета сделай. Тема Адлерский, где вы? Едем, бля. Обзор народ Равшана. Он грязный, вчера он лизал. Брат, убери на эту камеру. Я не стримю, я ютубер, брат, я не могу сдержать стрим. Если я минут 10 подержу, то меня выгонят с ютуба. Клянись. Брат, диски очень красивые вот эти. В 3? В 3. Все, брат. Когда купишь, мой номер удали. Не, я поеду. Я ж твой оператор. Куда за эти 2 минуты этой машины я не застал. А, брат, тебе обзор не показывал? Да, мне надо. А, можно посмотреть? А мне можно? Нет. А почему-то нельзя заходить с камерой? Что? Потому что Потому что в этом заключается перевес моей работы, брат. Перевес? Что у меня не как у всех. Услышал, родной. Какая сопля? Блядь, нахуй я пробовал. Что? Короче, надо аккуратно, да, тоже работать? Моих работают. Ну, в том плане, а? Смотри, смотри. Смотри. Смотри, как работают. Видно? Так, это для чего делается? Угу. Пацаны, сладкий пупсик, это завтра 15:00. Пацаны, Скоростов что там? Проиграли? Скоростову? Я в ахуе. Это дефолт. Какой дефолт? Я первый раз вижу это. Ой. Знаю, почему он это не работает, а второй стоит просто. Овшан, вот ты не заебался стримить эти вот машины, блядь, в СТО находишь, шлямота, блядь. Я не сделал, братан, иди, блядь, пострими вот. Доту. О, я его стримил, да. Да, до меня хуй дойдет, я все стримлю. Хватит машины стримить. Что не скажешь, я все стримлю. Братан, это ж как на машине. 10 человек смотрят, один работает. Под капотом. Бля, слышал, что ли, Сань? Нет, канал. Ну не подслушивай. Хватит разить. Гоу в заварку, гоу. Да, стрим сделаем. Какой? Как делал Кайснат. Стрим в тюрьме. Так, и что, если я сейчас это, их весь состав позову, братан, пиздец будет, ебаный рот, там, блядь. Вторая, блядь, мировая будет. Лёва, представляешь, что? Не, там пиздец будет, братан, там, в смысле, ну, реально можно будет, понял, ну, уже превратиться из постановы в настоящую тюрьму. Понял? Вот, их всех позвать, чтобы, ну, типа, я, ты, Ренат, Анар заходили, типа, понял? Представь, блядь, как они нас будут, бля, как они нас заебут, грузить будут вообще. Нам просто на крючок вот так вот поддеть и все, братан. Висишь, ты висишь. Слышь, что он говорит? Он говорит, он хочет сделать специвент, короче, понял? Как Кайсенат сделал. Тюрьма, короче, и туда, ну, звал, понял, личности разного формата. Прикинь, так позвать всех наших, вот, кто? А кого ваших, брат? Еще раз не понял. Ну, ваших. Смотри, он хочет сделать спецпроект. Понял? Окей. Как Кайсенат делал, помнишь? Нет. Может, не видел, наверное, да, не смотрю телек. Он, короче, Кайсенат, короче, сделал сам, они построили тюрьму. Слушай, послушай мне, я слушаю тебя. Меня слушаешь? Да. Смотри, как Кайсенат делал, он, брат, взял помещение и сделал из него тюрьму, брат, американскую тюрьму, вот это робы ходят, там оранжевые формы, да. Он хочет то же самое сделать, говорит, и говорит, всех наших, понял, позвать. Ну, концовку он забрал, если честно. Понял? Не, он правда хочет. Реально? Давай, бомба. Прикинь? А почему нет? Братан, ты что? Чтобы это все, брат, там круглосуточно велся стрим. Бля, там и будет. Брат, я представляю, как нас с Сэмом просто весь день грузить будет. Это целый день, блядь. Представь, там реально туда она раз рядом, слышишь? Да оставь, ну. Она раз рядом, два раза, тут еще, братан, пиздец будет. Слышь, ну. Я думаю, я бы еще позвал бы кого-то.
Да, ну у них там прикольный стрим был, понял? Они прям несколько дней жили там.
А стримит один человек или...
И там камеры расставлены.
Как типа ты снова камеры переключаются?
Знаешь, сколько не было? Знаешь, сколько не было?
Охуй надо.
У них было, прикинь,
Там девочек, прикинь, позвали. Понял, они неделю там были.
Осуждаю.
Там вот так, брат, не внутрь,
А куда?
навстречу просто.
а в Америке,
Долбоёбы вот так переложили.
в Америке же, понял, вот эти вот свидания через стену.
Да.
Вот, они с ними разговаривали так. Там прям свиданки были,
Вот
все
так и
было.
говорил, вот так и говорит.
Это что, нельзя сейчас?
Да, хорошая, да, мне нравится. А где это?
Не?
А где это?
Где он
Покажи.
денег покупал?
Покажи.
Ах, что это далеко. Ну а что поделать, ахчи?
Ну если надо будет, приеду.
А где это можно сделать?
Не приедешь, а приезжаешь всегда.
Где квесты делают? Вас
ты
всех,
был делать,
вас всех спасают после этого стрима, ты понимаешь?
Брат, всех. Причем чаще, скорее всего, твоих китов.
Почему?
Деанон.
Откуда ты берешь эти слова? Деанон, Ксенон.
Я же машину умею еще.
Брат, вот хозяин дисков. Вот.
Я черный без хозяина, что
я
хочешь.
вот хозяин дисков. Это просто на братской основе, они хранятся тут. Все, я ничего
вас?
не буду сделать, брат. Что ты понимал?
На один день ровно забирай. один день
Ни
твой.
один человек не имеет права трогать их дисков, чтобы ты понимал.
Один день, Амаз. Любой день, выбери один день твои. Один сухой день. Солнечный.
О,
Смело, брат.
Без
Один сухой день твой здесь.
как же мне нога болит.
Не
ужас.
влазит, не резину померим, хоть на миллиметр меньше станет, я покупаю тебе новую резину.
Не, брат, тут дело не в этом, смотри. Они просто хромированы. Сейчас, брат, не дай бог, маму выпишет, блядь, и потом
Осуждаю.
их восстанавливать, блядь, вот это все нахуй надо. Я сейчас я жду
кому?
хорошую погоду, их надену.
Пацаны, кто в чате ждет Весту хотя 15 секунд?
Ой, да он вообще не быстро.
Там знаете какая тема вообще? Это я беру Весту там же, где брал Гранту. И они сказали, что... И они мне набрали, говорят, короче, на какой базар? Приезжают в Краснодар.